The winter wind cut through the ceremonial gardens like a blade, carrying the scent of pine and frost. Elira Moonshade kept her head bowed, blonde hair falling forward to shield her face. Her grandmother once told her that on the night of the choosing, the moon goddess would touch her chosen ones with silver light. Tonight, the clouds hung heavy, and no moonbeams penetrated the darkness. Perhaps the goddess herself couldn't bear to witness her humiliation. Elira stood at the edge of the gathering, her ceremonial white dress billowing slightly in the wind. Around her, other Omegas displayed themselves proudly, unblemished skin glowing, eyes bright with anticipation. Their laughter rang through the air like wind chimes, beautiful and delicate. Hers remained locked in her throat, a prisoner of fear. Fingers instinctively rose to trace the scar that ran from her left temple down to her jaw, a parting gift from the attack that had killed her parents when she was 12. 10 years had passed, but the raised tissue remained, a permanent reminder that she was damaged goods in a world that valued perfection. In her pocket, she clutched the silver wolf pendant her father had given her before his death. The sapphire eye caught what little light existed in the garden, seeming to glow with an inner fire. The chain was made of intricately woven silver threads, unlike any craftsmanship from the Southern Alliance. "You shouldn't be here," a harsh voice interrupted her thoughts. Elder Thorn approached, her ceremonial robes of midnight blue swirling around her thin frame. Despite her advanced age, she moved with the precision of a predator. Her eyes, sharp as flint, swept over Elira with undisguised disdain. "The King of Shadowcrest himself comes tonight. After 100 years, the Alpha King graces us with his presence, and you would present yourself as our offering with that?" Her gaze lingered on the scar partially visible through Elira's curtain of hair. Elira lifted her chin slightly, meeting the elder's gaze. "I have the same right as any Omega to attend the ceremony." "Rights?" Elder Thorn laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "This isn't about rights, girl. This is about peace between territories, about making the correct impression." She leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper, "about not offending an Alpha King with damaged goods." The words stung, though Elira had heard variations of them throughout her life. She had learned to build walls around her heart, to shield herself from the barbs thrown by those who saw only her scar. "My sister has been excused from the ceremony," Elira said, changing tactics. "I request the same consideration." Elder Thorn's eyes narrowed. "Your sister is too young. You are of age. The ancient laws demand your participation, though I strongly suggest you remain at the back, out of sight." A group of Omegas passed nearby, their silken dresses catching the torchlight, their perfectly arranged hair adorned with winter blossoms. They cast curious glances at Elira before whispering behind delicate hands. "There is a prophecy," Elder Thorn said suddenly, her voice so low Elira nearly missed it. "An Omega bearing a mark of the moon's wrath will either save the Northern Kingdom or destroy it utterly." Her eyes flicked to Elira's scar. "Some believe your scar is such a mark. I cannot risk it." Elira frowned, confusion mixing with disbelief. "That's absurd. My scar came from a rogue wolf attack, not some divine judgment. Nevertheless, I cannot take chances, not with the future of our alliance." The elder straightened, her moment of superstitious fear replaced by practical authority. "Stay at the back. Do not draw attention. When the ceremony ends, leave quietly. For all our sakes." With that ominous warning, Elder Thorn departed, leaving Elira with more questions than answers. A prophecy? The elder must be growing senile, seeing omens in common scars. Elira retreated further into the shadows, finding a stone bench partially hidden behind a winter bare willow tree. From here, she could observe without being observed, participate without truly being seen. The ceremonial gardens were ancient, the stone pathways worn smooth by generations of feet. Torches lined the central circle, their flames dancing in the winter wind. Beyond the gardens, the Southern Alliance territory spread out, rolling hills, small villages, and the distant capital city, its lights a dim glow on the horizon. Her hand found the silver pendant again, fingers tracing its contours. When her father had placed it in her palm 10 years ago, his eyes had held a strange urgency. "Keep this close, always," he'd said. "It's your heritage, though I cannot explain now. Someday you'll understand." Days later, he and her mother were dead, their bodies torn apart by what the elders claimed were rogue wolves. Elira had survived only because her father had fought to his last breath, giving her and her younger sister Sarah time to hide. But one wolf had found her, its claws leaving their permanent mark on her face before the pack warriors arrived. The wolf had been different from any she'd seen before, larger, with eyes that held intelligence beyond that of a mere animal. In her nightmares, those eyes still watched her, calculating and cold. A hush fell over the gathering. Elira looked up to see the Omegas arranging themselves in ordered rows, their movements practiced and graceful. The choosing ceremony was about to begin. For a moment, she considered slipping away. What was the point of staying? No alpha from the Northern Kingdom would look twice at her, not with so many perfect specimens on display. Yet something kept her rooted to the spot, perhaps simple defiance or the strange pull of her father's pendant growing warm against her skin. The ceremonial drums began, each beat matching the rhythm of her heart. The crowd parted, and she caught her first glimpse of the delegation from the Northern Kingdom of Shadowcrest. Warriors moved in practiced formation, their armor gleaming dully in the torchlight. Unlike the ceremonial attire she'd expected, they wore functional battle gear, as if prepared for conflict rather than celebration. Their faces remained impassive, eyes constantly scanning for threats. Behind them came the council members in their formal furs, 7 elders representing the 7 great bloodlines of the North. They studied the gathered Omegas with calculated interest, making mental notes and occasional comments to each other. Then the air itself seemed to change, growing heavy with power and expectation. He didn't stride in like Elira expected a king would. He moved with the quiet confidence of a predator who never needed to announce his presence. King Valorian Blackclaw of Shadowcrest. He wasn't what the stories had described. The rumors spoke of a young, handsome alpha in his prime. Instead, this man appeared to be in his mid-40s, his black hair streaked with silver at the temples. A thin scar bisected his right eyebrow, and his face bore the weathered look of someone who had seen too much war and hardship. Yet it was his eyes that truly captured attention, pale blue, almost silver in the torchlight, with an intensity that seemed to pierce through all pretense. Despite his age, he radiated strength and authority that made every wolf in the vicinity lower their gaze instinctively, all except Elira, because she was already staring at the ground, counting the patterns in the stone beneath her feet, desperately wishing she could dissolve into the earth. "Eligible Omegas, step forward," Elder Thorn called, her voice carrying across the silent crowd. The girls around her moved as one, graceful steps taking them to the center of the ceremonial circle. Elira remained frozen, half hidden behind her willow tree. "The choosing ceremony honors our oldest traditions," Elder Thorn announced. "Tonight, worthy Omegas will be recognized by our northern allies, strengthening the bonds between our territories." Recognized, the polite word for selected, claimed, taken. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew. This ceremony was political, an exchange of Omegas to maintain peace between territories that had once been at war. Living treaties, bound in flesh and blood. The selection process began with the council members circling the Omegas, examining them like prized livestock. Some girls straightened their shoulders, tilting their chins up proudly. Others kept their eyes modestly downcast, the perfect picture of Omega submission. Elira watched from her hiding place, relief mingling with a strange disappointment. She would be overlooked, forgotten. Exactly as Elder Thorn had planned. A cold drop of rain fell on her cheek, sliding down like a tear. Then another. The clouds had finally broken, but the ceremony continued without pause. Rain in the middle of the choosing was considered an omen, though whether good or ill depended on who interpreted it. As the rainfall increased, Elira noticed something strange. The raindrops catching the torchlight had a reddish tint, like diluted blood. Whispers spread through the crowd. Blood rain, the rarest of omens, not seen in the southern territories for generations. Her dress began to cling to her skin, the thin fabric offering little protection against the increasingly heavy downpour. Her hair, now damp, stuck to her face, including the scar she so desperately tried to hide. Panic rose in her throat as she attempted to rearrange her soaked locks without drawing attention. Then she felt it, a gaze so intense it seemed to burn through her. Slowly, Elira looked up. King Valorian Blackclaw stood at the edge of the ceremonial circle, his attention fixed solely on her. The red-tinged rain fell between them, creating a shimmering crimson curtain. Despite the distance and poor light, his eyes found hers unerringly. "You there," he called, his voice cutting through the ceremonial chants and the pattering of rain. "The one hiding, step forward." Every head turned toward Elira. Her heart stopped. She remained frozen, unable to obey or flee. "I said step forward." It wasn't said loudly, but the command in his voice made it impossible to disobey. The alpha compulsion washed over her, not painful, but irresistible. Her legs moved of their own accord, carrying her into the circle of torchlight. She kept her head bowed, blonde hair still partially shielding her scar despite the rain plastering it to her skin. Water dripped from her chin, from the sodden hem of her white dress, now nearly transparent in its wetness. King Valorian approached her with measured steps. Each footfall seemed to echo in the sudden silence. He stopped before her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the scent of pine and winter mountains that clung to him. "Your name," he demanded. "Elira Moonshade, Your Majesty." Her voice emerged as a whisper, nearly lost beneath the sound of falling rain. His hand moved toward her face. Elira flinched instinctively, a reaction born from years of mockery and unwanted attention to her scar. His hand paused in midair, and for a moment something like understanding flashed across his stern features. Then, with surprising gentleness, his fingers brushed her wet hair away from her face, fully exposing her scar to him and everyone watching. The touch lingered, his thumb tracing the path of the raised tissue from temple to jaw. Elira waited for the disgust, the dismissal. Instead, his expression remained unchanged as he studied her face, his gaze holding neither pity nor revulsion. "Who told you to hide at the back?" he asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Before she could answer, Elder Thorn approached, bowing deeply. "Your Majesty, there are many other suitable candidates. This one is damaged." The word cut deeper than any blade. Elira lowered her eyes again, shame burning through her. The temperature seemed to drop precipitously. When King Valorian spoke, his voice carried the chill of northern winters. "Choose your next words with extreme care, Elder." The older woman paled, taking a step back. "I simply meant, I know exactly what you meant." The interruption was soft yet devastating. "And you are dismissed." The elder's mouth opened and closed, fish-like with shock, before she bowed again and retreated. The king's attention returned to Elira, who stood trembling, from cold, from fear, from the strange intensity of his regard. The blood rain was falling harder now, drumming against the stones. The ceremonial fires hissed and sputtered, fighting to stay lit. All around them, people were seeking shelter, the careful organization of the ceremony crumbling beneath the unexpected downpour. "That pendant," Valorian said suddenly, his eyes fixing on the silver wolf now visible through her rain-soaked dress. "Where did you get it?" Elira's hand moved instinctively to cover it. "It was my father's." Something flashed in his eyes, recognition, then disbelief, followed by a carefully controlled anger. "Impossible. That pendant belonged to my queen, lost 100 years ago with her death." Confusion swept through Elira. "There must be some mistake. My father gave it to me before he died, 10 years ago." "Your father?" Valorian's voice had grown dangerously quiet. "What was his name?" "Gareth Moonshade. He was a hunter." A muscle twitched in the king's jaw. "Moonshade is not a southern name." Around them, the council members had drawn closer, listening intently despite the rain. One of them, an older man with a silver-streaked beard, leaned toward the king. "Sire, this is highly irregular. The ceremony is concluded," Valorian finished for him. "I have made my choice." Gasps and whispers erupted from the gathered crowd. The chosen Omega was always announced at the end of the ceremony, after all candidates had been evaluated. For the king to make such a declaration so abruptly was unprecedented. But Elira barely registered the commotion. Her mind was stuck on his earlier words. The pendant had belonged to his queen? How could her father have possessed it? "Come," Valorian said simply, extending his hand to her. "We have much to discuss." Elira stared at his outstretched hand, uncomprehending. "Where?" A smile touched his lips, transforming his severe face into something almost gentle. Out of this blood rain would be a start. Whispers erupted around them. From the corner of her eye, Elira could see the shocked expressions of the other Omegas, the calculating looks from the council members. Her fingers tightened around her father's pendant. Something inside her shifted, like pieces of a puzzle rearranging themselves. This moment felt inevitable, as though her entire life had been leading here. She placed her trembling hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm despite the cold rain, strong and sure. He led her toward the great hall, his warriors immediately forming a protective formation around them. Behind them, Elder Thorn was attempting to restore order to the ceremony, but her voice was drowned out by the storm and the chaos. As they entered the warm, torchlit hall, servants rushed forward with towels. To Elira's absolute shock, Valorian took one and gently placed it around her shoulders himself. "My sister," Elira said suddenly, remembering Sarah. "I cannot leave her." Valorian studied her with that same unsettling intensity. "The girl with auburn hair? Younger than you?" Elira nodded, surprised he had noticed Sarah. "She may accompany us to Shadowcrest. I will make the arrangements." Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by the realization of what this meant. "Shadowcrest? You're taking me north?" "Of course." His tone suggested this should have been obvious. "You have been chosen." "But why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. I'm not what an Alpha King should want." "And what exactly do you believe an Alpha King should want?" There was a dangerous edge to his question. Elira swallowed hard. "Someone beautiful, unblemished, someone worthy of standing beside you." For a long moment he said nothing, just looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. Then he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that sent shivers down her spine. "Every tear you've shed, every moment you've hidden your face, I've been watching. And do you know what I saw?" He didn't wait for her answer. "Strength. The kind that doesn't come from being unblemished, but from being broken and continuing anyway." His fingers hovered near her scar, not quite touching. "Your scars tell me more about your worth than any unblemished face ever could." The great hall doors burst open, and a group of dripping council members entered. Valorian straightened, his expression shifting back to the impassive mask of authority. "We depart for Shadowcrest at dawn," he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. "Have your sister ready." As he walked away to greet the council members, Elira stood frozen, towel clutched around her, water pooling at her feet. The silver wolf pendant seemed to pulse against her skin, warm despite the chill. Something was happening here that she didn't understand. The prophecy Elder Thorn had mentioned, the king's recognition of her father's pendant, the blood rain that still fell outside. None of it made sense, yet all of it seemed connected. She thought of her father's final words to her. "Keep this close, always. It's your heritage." What heritage? What secrets had died with him? The feast hall buzzed with tension and whispers. Elira sat at the high table, a position of honor she had neither expected nor prepared for. The chair beside her, reserved for the Alpha King, remained empty while Valorian conducted diplomatic discussions with the council elders across the room. Sarah had been permitted to join her, though several seats away. When their eyes met, her younger sister gave her a small, encouraging smile tinged with bewilderment. "Don't touch the silverware until the Alpha takes his first bite," whispered an attendant who materialized behind her. "Keep your eyes lowered when addressing council members, but maintain eye contact with the king when he speaks to you." The rules washed over Elira in a flood, too many to absorb. She nodded mechanically, fingers finding the wolf pendant now hidden beneath her dry gown, a deep blue affair hastily provided by the servants, finer than anything she'd ever worn. "Most importantly," the attendant continued, leaning closer, "don't ask about the Frostblood curse. It's a sensitive topic." Before Elira could inquire what this curse might be, a hush fell over the room. King Valorian entered, his presence commanding immediate attention. He'd changed into formal attire, dark clothing adorned with silver embroidery that caught the light as he moved. Every eye followed him as he made his way to the high table. To her. Her heart thundered in her chest as he took the seat beside her. Up close, she noticed details she'd missed before. The lines at the corners of his eyes, speaking of both laughter and hardship. The slight asymmetry of his features that somehow made him more striking rather than less. He wasn't conventionally handsome in the way younger alphas were with their perfect symmetry and unblemished skin. There was something wild about him, untamed despite his regal bearing. "You look like you're planning an escape route," he said quietly, amusement warming his voice as he reached for his goblet. Heat flooded her cheeks. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to me." His eyes met hers, and for a moment the noise of the feast faded away. "Are you comfortable, Elira?" The question surprised her. Alphas, especially those of his status, rarely concerned themselves with an Omega's comfort. "The dress is lovely." "That wasn't my question." She swallowed hard. Truth or platitude? The intensity of his gaze made lying seem impossible. "No," she admitted. "I don't know why I'm here or what's expected of me." Instead of offense, something like satisfaction crossed his face. "Honesty? Good." He took a sip from his goblet, then placed it down deliberately. "What do you know of Northern traditions?" "Very little," she admitted. "Only stories." "What kind of stories?" She hesitated, not wanting to offend him. The stories they grew up with painted the Northern wolves as brutal warriors, cold as the lands they ruled. Tales of their harsh justice and ancient blood rituals had frightened her as a child. "You're afraid to tell me." It wasn't a question. Are they so terrible, these stories?" "They say Northern alphas choose their mates based on strength," she said carefully. "That weakness is not tolerated." He studied her, his expression unreadable. "And you believe yourself weak because of this?" His fingers hovered near her face, indicating her scar without touching it. "Isn't that what everyone sees? What everyone believes?" "I don't care what everyone believes." The coldness in his tone made her shiver. "I care what you believe." Before she could answer, servers appeared with the first course, a rich soup that steamed in the cool air of the hall. King Valorian lifted his spoon, and only then did the rest of the gathering begin to eat. As they ate, Elira became aware of the stares directed their way, some curious, some envious, some openly hostile. A particularly beautiful Omega from a prominent family looked at her with such venom that she nearly choked on her soup. "Ignore Lydia," the king said, noticing the direction of her gaze. "Her ambition exceeds her worth." "She's beautiful," Elira said before she could stop herself. "Beauty without substance is like a flower without scent, decorative but ultimately forgettable." He set down his spoon. "Tell me about your scar." The abrupt change of subject startled her. Her hand instinctively rose to her face before she forced it back down to her lap. "You don't need to hide it," he said quietly. "Not from me." Something in his voice, a gentleness she hadn't expected, loosened the knot in her chest. "There was an attack when I was 12. Rogue wolves. They killed my parents." The words came haltingly, each one dredged up from the darkest corner of her memories. "My father fought them, gave me and Sarah time to run. One caught me, dragged me back by my hair, his claws." Her fingers traced the path of the scar without touching it. "I don't remember much after that, just blood and screaming. Our pack warriors arrived too late for my parents. but they saved me and Sarah." Valorian's expression had darkened with each word, a storm gathering in his eyes. "These rogues, were they caught? Punished?" She nodded. "They were executed." "Good," he said, the single word heavy with finality. Then more softly, "You survived. You protected your sister." "I failed. I wasn't strong enough to—" "You were a child," he interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "And yet you lived through something that would have broken many grown wolves. That is strength, Elira." The second course arrived, roasted venison with autumn vegetables. The rich aroma filled the air, but her appetite had fled. Valorian seemed to notice, placing only a small portion on her plate before serving himself. "You speak as if you understand," she said quietly, pushing a carrot around her plate. "I do." He rolled up his left sleeve, revealing a mass of scarred tissue that wrapped around his forearm like a twisted bracelet. The scar tissue was silvery white against his tanned skin, the damage so severe it was a wonder the limb was still functional. "We all carry marks. Some are simply more visible than others." She stared at the scars, unable to look away. "What happened?" "A story for another time." He rolled his sleeve back down. "But know this. In the North, scars are not marks of shame. They are proof of survival." A commotion across the hall drew their attention. Elder Thorne stood arguing with one of the Northern Council members, her face flushed with anger. "The prophecy is nonsense," she hissed, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "a superstitious legend with no basis in fact." "Yet your king has chosen the marked Omega," the councilman replied calmly. "Perhaps the moon goddess speaks through him, even if you refuse to hear." Elder Thorne's gaze darted to Elira, filled with undisguised fear and hostility. "That scar came from wolf claws, not divine judgment. To base such important decisions on ancient folklore is madness." King Valorian watched the exchange with narrowed eyes. Without raising his voice, he simply said, "Enough." Both Elder Thorne and the councilman fell silent immediately, turning toward the high table. Thorne bowed stiffly. "Apologies, Your Majesty. Council matters should not disrupt the feast." "Indeed they should not," Valorian agreed, his voice dangerously soft, "especially when they concern my chosen Omega." Elira's cheeks burned with embarrassment. So it had already started. The whispers, the questions, the challenges to his judgment for singling out the scarred Omega. "What prophecy?" she asked in a low voice, once the attention had moved elsewhere. Valorian studied her for a long moment before answering. "An Omega bearing the mark of the moon's wrath shall either break or mend the northern curse." "And you believe my scar is this mark? From the moon goddess?" "I believe very little is coincidence," he replied, "especially when it concerns the pendant you wear." Elira's hand went to her chest, feeling the outline of the silver wolf beneath the fabric of her gown. "You said it belonged to your queen. How is that possible? My father had it for as long as I can remember." "Queen Selene wore it until the day she disappeared a century ago." His voice had grown softer, tinged with an old sorrow. "It was created by the royal craftsman as a vessel of power, meant to amplify the blood magic of the royal line. Its sapphire eye is a moonstone from the sacred caves beneath Shadowcrest." "I don't understand. My father was a hunter from the southern territories. How would he have obtained a royal artifact?" "That," Valorian said, "is one of many questions we must answer." He glanced toward the windows where the blood rain still fell, now a gentle crimson mist. "The frost blood curse grows stronger with each passing year. Our lands die slowly, our people with them. For 20 years I've searched for a way to break it." His gaze returned to her, intense and searching. "Perhaps you are the answer the moon goddess has sent." Elira wanted to deny it, to insist she was simply an ordinary Omega with a scar and a hand-me-down pendant. But the conviction in his voice made her doubt her own certainty, and beneath that doubt, something stirred, a sense of purpose she'd never felt before. "We leave at dawn," Valorian said, noting her conflicted expression. "Regardless of weather or prophecy, The journey to Shadowcrest is long and not without danger." "What dangers?" she asked, suddenly concerned for Sarah. "Those who wish to maintain the curse," he replied cryptically. "And those who believe prophecies should be prevented rather than fulfilled." As if summoned by his words, the doors to the feast hall burst open. A warrior in northern armor strode in, making directly for the high table. He knelt before Valorian, speaking urgently in a low voice. The king's expression hardened as he listened. Without explanation, he rose from his seat. "Remain here," he instructed Elira. "Guards will be posted at your door tonight." He departed with the warrior, leaving Elira alone with her confusion and growing apprehension. Across the hall, Elder Thorne watched her with undisguised hostility. Sarah looked equally bewildered, but offered an encouraging smile. Whatever was happening here went far beyond a simple choosing ceremony. Something had been set in motion, something that had begun long before Elira was born. She touched the pendant through her dress, feeling its familiar contours. For the first time, she noticed it seemed to pulse with a faint warmth, like a heartbeat against her skin. Not just an ornament, but something alive. Something waiting. Dawn arrived with stubborn mist clinging to the ground and the lingering metallic scent of blood rain. Elira stood in the courtyard, a small bag of possessions at her feet, watching as the northern delegation prepared for departure. Warriors moved with practiced efficiency, checking weapons and supplies. Their movements reminded her of wolves in human form, fluid, powerful, always aware of their surroundings. Sarah stood beside her, her face pale but determined. Unlike Elira, she had slept through the night. Elira had lain awake, torn between terror and a strange, inexplicable anticipation she couldn't explain even to herself. "Have you seen him this morning?" Sarah whispered, her eyes scanning the busy courtyard. Elira shook her head. King Valorian had not appeared since leaving the feast last night. Part of her wondered if he had changed his mind, if daylight had made him reconsider his impulsive selection of the scarred Omega. "Maybe he forgot about us," she said, only half joking. "An Alpha King doesn't forget, little wolf." The deep voice behind them made both sisters jump. "Especially not about matters of importance." They turned to find King Valorian standing there, dressed for travel in leather and furs. In the pale morning light, he seemed more rugged, less formal than he had at the feast. The effect was somehow more intimidating, rather than less. "Your Majesty," Sarah curtsied deeply, her perfect manners a stark contrast to Elira's frozen silence. His gaze moved between them. Sisters, yet so different. One hides her strength behind perfect courtesy, the other behind her hair. Elira felt the familiar urge to touch her scar, to make sure it was covered, but she resisted. Instead, she met his eyes directly. "We're ready to travel when you are, Your Majesty." Something like approval flickered across his face. "Good. You'll ride with me. Your sister will travel with my general, Helena Ironheart." He gestured toward a tall, striking woman with sharp features and calculating eyes who stood near the horses. Helena served as his right hand and would help both sisters adjust to northern ways. The woman in question looked them over with a cool, assessing gaze that made Elira feel like merchandise being evaluated for quality. Whatever she saw apparently satisfied her, as she offered a short nod before returning to her preparations. A warrior approached, leading a magnificent black stallion. The horse was enormous, its coat gleaming in the morning light, its eyes intelligent and wary. "Phantom tolerates few riders besides myself," Valorian said, running a hand along the horse's powerful neck. "But we have a long journey ahead, and he is the strongest mount." Elira stared at the massive animal with trepidation. She had ridden before, of course, but never a war horse like this one, and never with another person. "I can ride alone," she offered, eyeing a gentler-looking mare nearby. "The northern path is treacherous, especially after blood rain," he replied. "I won't risk your safety to spare your comfort." Before she could protest further, he lifted her bag and secured it to his saddle, then turned to her with expectation clear in his stance. Around them, the rest of the party was mounting up, Sarah already being helped onto a horse beside General Helena. With resignation, Elira allowed Valorian to lift her onto Phantom's back as if she weighed nothing. The height was dizzying, the saddle clearly designed for someone much larger than her. A moment later, Valorian swung up behind her with effortless grace, his body a wall of heat at her back. "Relax," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear as he reached around her to take the reins. "Phantom responds to tension. Trust him as you must learn to trust me." Easy for him to say. Every muscle in her body had gone rigid the moment he settled behind her, his chest pressed against her back, his arms creating a cage around her as he held the reins. As they passed through the gates of her home for the last time, Elira caught a glimpse of Elder Thorne watching from a window, her expression thunderous. The old woman raised her hand in what might have been a warding gesture, her lips moving in what looked like a prayer or a curse. They rode in silence for the first hour. The steady rhythm of hooves against earth and the occasional call of a bird were the only sounds. The forest grew denser as they traveled north, ancient trees towering overhead, their branches creating a canopy that filtered the strengthening sunlight into dappled patterns on the ground. "You're home," Valorian said eventually, breaking the silence. "You'll miss it." It wasn't a question, but Elira answered anyway. "Yes, it's all I've ever known. And yet you left it without fighting, without tears." Elira twisted slightly to look at him over her shoulder. "Would tears have changed anything?" The corner of his mouth lifted. "No, but many would have shed them anyway, hoping to manipulate through displays of emotion." "I save my tears for when they matter," she said, turning forward again. His chest rumbled against her back in what might have been a suppressed laugh. "What matters enough for your tears, Elira Moonshade?" The question caught her off guard. What did make her cry? Not physical pain. She had learned to endure that. Not fear. She had lived with that constant companion for too long. "Loss," she said finally. "Powerlessness. Feeling invisible." "You felt all of those last night," he observed. "Yet you didn't cry." "I wasn't invisible last night. Quite the opposite." The bitter truth escaped before she could stop it. "Everyone saw me. The scarred Omega who somehow caught the king's attention. They stared. They whispered. They wondered what trick I'd used, what weakness of yours I'd exploited." His arms tightened around her, not painfully, but enough to make her acutely aware of the strength he held in check. "And what weakness do you think that might be, little wolf?" The endearment, if that's what it was, sent an unexpected shiver through her. "Pity, perhaps, or a desire to appear merciful and kind to your allies. You think very little of me if you believe I would choose a mate based on political appearances." Mate. The word hung in the air between them, unacknowledged, yet unavoidable. They both knew that was the purpose of the choosing ceremony, to select potential mates from allied packs. But hearing him say it so directly made it suddenly, terrifyingly real. "I don't know you well enough to think anything of you, Your Majesty," she said carefully. "Valorian," he corrected. "When we're alone, at least use my name." Elira swallowed hard. Using his name felt like crossing a boundary, accepting an intimacy she wasn't sure she was ready for. "Valorian," she said softly, testing the shape of it on her tongue. He made a sound of approval, the vibration of it traveling from his chest to her back. "Better. Now tell me about your sister. You protect her fiercely." The change of subject relieved some of the tension coiled within her. "Sarah is all the family I have left. She was only 8 when our parents died. I practically raised her after that." "She seems well-adjusted. Happy." "She is. Sarah has always been able to see the good in things, even in the darkest times." Elira smiled, thinking of her sister's resilient spirit. "She doesn't remember that night as clearly as I do." "A blessing for her. And sometimes a burden for you to carry the memories alone," he observed with surprising insight. The path narrowed, forcing the procession into a single file. Valorian guided Phantom with subtle shifts of his weight, the massive horse responding to commands Elira couldn't even detect. They rode in silence again until the trail widened once more. "The Northern Territory," she ventured, wanting to shift the focus away from herself. Is it truly as harsh as they say? Harsher in many ways. The winters are long, the terrain unforgiving. There was pride in his voice, rather than complaint. But there is beauty there that exists nowhere else. Forests untouched by human hands, mountains that pierce the clouds, aurora lights that dance across the night sky in colors you can't imagine. The way he described his home surprised her. She had expected a ruler focused on strength and power, to speak of fortresses and training grounds, not natural wonders. "It sounds beautiful," she admitted. "It is beautiful and dangerous, like all things worth knowing." There was a weight to his words that suggested he wasn't just speaking of his territory. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat. Valorian helped her down from Phantom, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Her legs trembled from the unaccustomed hours of riding, and she stumbled slightly when her feet touched the ground. "You'll grow accustomed to it," he said, steadying her with a hand on her arm. "We have 3 more days of travel ahead." 3 days. 3 more days of riding pressed against him, surrounded by his scent and warmth. 3 days before facing whatever awaited her in the Northern Territory. The thought made her stomach clench with anxiety. She found Sarah sitting on a fallen log, massaging her legs with a grimace. "How are you faring?" Elira asked, joining her. "I think my legs have permanently molded to the shape of a horse," she replied with a rueful smile. "But General Helena has been informative." "Informative? How?" Sarah glanced around to make sure no one was within earshot. "She told me about the North, about their customs, their beliefs, about the king." She lowered her voice further. "Elira, do you know what it means that he chose you himself rather than allowing his council to select?" Elira shook her head, though dread pooled in her stomach. "In Northern tradition, only a true mate is chosen directly by the Alpha King. It hasn't happened in 3 generations." Sarah's eyes were wide. "Helena says there are prophecies about it, about a scarred Omega who would bring change to the North." "Prophecies?" Elira scoffed, though her heart raced. "Sarah, you know how I feel about such things. After what happened to our parents, I know you don't believe in fate or destiny," she said gently, "but maybe—" "A coincidence," Elira interrupted firmly, "or a political strategy we don't yet understand." Sarah looked unconvinced, but let the matter drop as General Helena approached, carrying wooden bowls of stew for each of them. "Eat," the tall woman commanded. "The path grows more difficult from here, and we won't stop again until nightfall." Elira accepted the bowl with murmured thanks, but her appetite had fled. Across the small clearing, Valorian stood with his warriors, discussing something in low, urgent tones. As if feeling her gaze, he looked up, his pale eyes locking with hers across the distance. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, an acknowledgement, before he returned to his conversation. "He watches you," Helena said, settling beside them with her own food. "Even when engaged elsewhere, he is aware of your every movement." "Why?" The question escaped before Elira could stop it. Helena studied her, her sharp features unreadable. "That is for him to explain when the time comes. But know this, Southern Wolf, our king does nothing without purpose. If he has chosen you, there is reason beyond what any of us may guess." Her cryptic answer did nothing to ease Elira's growing unease. Before she could press further, a shout from one of the scouts drew everyone's attention. The warrior burst into the clearing, face grim. "Trackers, my king, following our trail, less than an hour behind." Valorian's expression darkened. "How many?" "At least a dozen. Moving fast, traveling light." "Hunters," Valorian growled. Then he issued rapid commands, warriors moving instantly to obey. "Break camp. We ride north through the ravine. If they seek a confrontation, let it be on terrain of our choosing." The peaceful meal dissolved into urgent activity. Sarah looked to Elira with frightened eyes. "Hunters? What does that mean?" Elira had no answer for her, but Helena did. "Bounty hunters," the general explained tersely. "There are those who would pay well for northern blood, especially royal blood." "Or for an Omega chosen at the ceremony," added a warrior nearby, giving Elira a pointed look. A chill ran down her spine. She hadn't considered that she might be a target now, simply because of Valorian's attention. As if summoned by her thoughts, he appeared at her side. "Stay close to me," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "If we're separated, make for the northern ridge. Helena will ensure your sister's safety." Elira nodded, fear making her throat tight. He helped her onto Phantom once more, mounting behind her with fluid grace. This time, she didn't stiffen at the contact, fear of unknown hunters overriding any discomfort at his proximity. They set off at a faster pace, the horses sensing the tension and responding with eager speed. The forest blurred around them, Phantom's powerful strides eating up the ground beneath them. Valorian's body was a solid presence at her back, his arms a secure cage around her as he guided the stallion through increasingly difficult terrain. "Who are they?" she asked, raising her voice slightly to be heard over the thunder of hooves. "Mercenaries, most likely," he replied, "hired by those who oppose the alliance between North and South." "Because of me?" The thought that people might die because of his inexplicable choice weighed heavily. His arms tightened around her. "Not because of you. Because of politics and power. The eternal games of those who cannot accept peace." They reached the ravine he had mentioned, a narrow passage between towering rock walls, barely wide enough for two horses to ride abreast. The procession slowed, forced into a more vulnerable formation by the terrain. "If they catch us here," she began. "They won't," he said, the certainty in his voice almost reassuring. Almost. As they entered the shadowed passage, Elira found herself holding her breath, straining to hear any sound of pursuit over the clatter of their own horses. The ravine seemed to go on forever, the walls rising higher on either side, blocking the afternoon sun and plunging them into premature twilight. The sound came without warning, a high, whistling noise followed by a heavy thud as an arrow embedded itself in the rock wall just inches from her head. "Ambush!" The cry went up from the rear guard. Chaos erupted as more arrows rained down from above. Valorian's reaction was instantaneous. He pulled Phantom to a halt, twisted in the saddle, and drew a sword she hadn't even realized he carried. In the same fluid motion, he swung her around so that she was facing him, protected by his body, as arrows continued to fall around them. "Hold tight," he commanded, and she obeyed without thinking, her arms locking around his waist as he spurred Phantom forward with a shout that echoed off the ravine walls. The battle unfolded in fragments of sound and motion, the clash of metal, shouts of pain and fury, the thunder of hooves on stone. She caught glimpses over Valorian's shoulder as he fought one-handed, the other arm keeping her secure against him. Warriors fell in rows. Blood darkened the ground, and through it all, Phantom carried them forward, responding to commands she couldn't hear or feel. "Elira!" Valorian's voice cut through her fear, forcing her to focus on his face. "When I say, you run straight ahead out of the ravine. Don't look back. Don't stop. I can't leave you. You can. You will." His eyes burned with an intensity that brooked no argument. "Promise me." She nodded, unable to refuse the command in his voice. "I promise." He pressed something cold and metal into her hand, a small dagger with an ornate handle. "If anyone but me or my warriors approaches you, use this. Aim for the throat or eyes." The practical advice shocked her out of her paralysis. This wasn't a fairy tale rescue. He expected her to fight if necessary. They broke free of the main battle, Phantom carrying them toward the end of the ravine where daylight beckoned. Hope surged within her. They would make it. They would escape. Then she saw them. 3 figures blocking the exit, bows raised and aimed directly at them. "Now!" Valorian shouted, pulling Phantom to a halt and practically throwing her from the saddle. "Run!" She hit the ground running, the dagger clutched in her hand, her father's pendant bouncing against her chest with each stride. Behind her, she heard Valorian's roar of challenge as he charged the ambushers. She didn't look back. She had promised. The daylight grew brighter as she neared the ravine's end, her lungs burning, legs pumping. Freedom was just steps away. She would reach the ridge, find safety, wait for Valorian and the others to join her. A figure stepped out from behind a boulder, blocking her path. Tall, scarred, with eyes that held no humanity. A hunter. Without thinking, she raised the dagger Valorian had given her. Her father's words echoed in her mind. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it. Time slowed as the hunter advanced toward her, a cruel smile spreading across his face. Her grip tightened on the dagger, the metal cold against her palm. She had never fought before, not like this, not for her life. But something primal awakened inside her, a will to survive that overrode fear. "The scarred Omega," he said, his voice rough with anticipation. "Worth twice the bounty alive, but still valuable dead." He lunged forward with unexpected speed. She dodged instinctively, the movement more animal than human, her body remembering what her mind had never learned. The dagger slashed out, catching him across the forearm. He hissed in pain, but didn't slow. "Fight all you want, little wolf. Makes it more entertaining." His next attack drove her backward, her feet scrabbling for purchase on the rocky ground. She knew she couldn't match him for strength or skill. Her only advantage was her size, smaller, quicker. She feinted right, then darted left, trying to slip past him toward the open ground beyond the ravine. His hand caught her hair, yanking her backward with brutal force. Pain exploded across her scalp as he pulled her against his chest, his arm like an iron band around her throat. "Not so fast," he growled against her ear. "The Northern King will pay handsomely to get you back." The dagger was still in her hand, partly concealed by her sleeve. With the last of her fading strength, she drove it backward and up, aiming as Valorian had instructed for the throat. The hunter's scream was wet and gurgling. His grip loosened as he staggered back, hands rising to the wound in his neck. Horror and disbelief mingled in his eyes as he fell to his knees, then collapsed forward onto the stone. Elira stood frozen, the bloody dagger trembling in her hand, unable to process what she had just done. She had taken a life. The reality of it washed over her in waves of nausea and shock. A shout from within the ravine snapped her back to the present. More hunters could be coming. She couldn't stay here, couldn't freeze. Forcing her legs to move, she stumbled toward the ridge Valorian had indicated, leaving the fallen hunter behind. The hillside was steep, covered in loose scree that slid beneath her feet, making the climb treacherous. Each step required concentration, each handhold carefully chosen. She kept moving upward, driven by the sounds of battle that still echoed from the ravine below. When she reached the ridgetop, she collapsed behind an outcropping of rock, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her hands still shaking. From this vantage point, she could see the end of the ravine where Valorian had confronted the three ambushers. The ground was empty now, no sign of either friend or foe. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, she waited, clinging to the hope that Valorian and the others had survived, that they would come for her. As twilight deepened, doubt began to gnaw at the edges of that hope. What if they had been defeated? What if Valorian had fallen? What if Sarah— No, she couldn't think that way. She refused to accept that she might be alone again, that she might have lost everything once more. A sound from below, the crunch of boots on stone, sent her pressing deeper into the shadows. She raised the dagger, still crusted with dried blood, ready to defend herself again if necessary. "Elira!" Valorian's voice, though quiet, carried clearly to her hiding place. "You can come out now. It's safe." Relief flooded through her with such force that her legs nearly gave way as she stood. She emerged from behind the rocks to see Valorian climbing the last few yards to the ridge, his clothing torn and bloodied, but his movement still powerful and sure. Before she could think better of it, she ran to him. He caught her against his chest with a grunt of surprise, his arms enfolding her in warmth and strength that felt, in that moment, like salvation itself. "You're alive," she whispered against his shoulder, breathing in his scent of leather, forest, and something uniquely him. I feared. "It would take more than a few hired blades to separate me from what's mine," he said, his voice a low rumble that she felt more than heard. "What's mine?" The possessive declaration should have offended her, should have raised her hackles. Instead, it sent a shiver of something dangerously close to pleasure down her spine. She pulled back slightly, reality reasserting itself. "Sarah? The others?" "Helena got your sister away as soon as the attack began. They're waiting at the camp we've established half a league north." His eyes, bright even in the growing darkness, searched her face. "You're hurt." She touched her cheek, feeling the sting of a cut she hadn't even noticed in the heat of escape. "It's nothing, just a scratch." His thumb brushed just beneath the cut. Featherlight. "You killed one of them." It wasn't a question. He must have found the body on his way to find her. Shame and a strange, fierce pride warred within her. "I did what I had to do." "Yes," he agreed, studying her with new respect. "You did. Many would have frozen, would have begged or surrendered. I promised I would run. I promised I would survive." She met his gaze steadily. "I keep my promises." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight curve of the lips, not quite a smile, but something warmer than his usual stern countenance. "Come," he said, taking her hand. "Night falls quickly in these mountains, and we have wounded to tend." The descent was easier with him guiding her, his hands steady and sure around hers. They reached the bottom of the ridge as the last light faded from the sky, stars beginning to emerge in the deepening blue above. "What happened?" she asked as they walked north along the base of the ridge. "After you sent me away." "The ambush was poorly executed," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "They had numbers, but little skill. We lost 2 warriors, and several more are wounded, but none fatally." The casual mention of death reminded her that this man lived with violence as a constant companion. To him, the loss of 2 warriors was an acceptable outcome for an ambush survived. She wondered what other hardships he accepted as the normal cost of his position, his life. "Who sent them?" she asked. "You said they were mercenaries. Who hired them?" Valorian's expression darkened. "That remains to be discovered, but they will be found, and they will answer for today's attack." The promise of retribution in his voice sent a chill through her. She had no doubt he would keep that promise, and that the punishment would be severe. They reached the camp as true night fell. Fires had been lit, their warm glow illuminating a scene of organized efficiency. Despite the day's violence, wounded were being tended, horses cared for, guards posted at strategic points around the perimeter. Sarah rushed toward her the moment they entered the camp, flinging herself into her arms with a sob of relief. "Thank the goddess you're safe. I was so worried when they separated us." Elira held her tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, reassuring herself that she truly was unharmed. "I'm fine. We're both fine now." Over her shoulder, she saw General Helena watching them, her expression unreadable. When their eyes met, the general offered a slight nod, acknowledgement perhaps, or approval. "The king found you himself," Sarah whispered, pulling back to examine her sister. "He wouldn't let anyone else go, even when they told him there might be more hunters in the hills." The revelation that Valorian had risked himself personally to find her, rather than sending warriors, made something warm unfurl in her chest. She glanced around, but he had already moved away, speaking with his commanders, issuing quiet orders. Helena approached, carrying a cloth and a small pot of something that smelled medicinal. "For your face," she said, indicating Elira's cut. "It should be cleaned before it festers." Elira accepted her ministrations gratefully, wincing only slightly as the herbal mixture stung the open wound. "Thank you for taking care of my sister, and for this." "You handled yourself well today," Helena said, her tone neutral, but her eyes appraising. Many Omegas would have collapsed into hysteria at the first sign of danger. "I'm not most Omegas," Elira replied. "So it seems." The general finished treating her cut and stepped back. "The king has ordered that you and your sister share my tent tonight. Extra guards will be posted. Rest while you can. We leave before first light." After she walked away, Sarah leaned close. "She's terrifying, but I think she likes you, or at least respects you." "Let's hope so," Elira murmured. "We'll need allies in the north." The realization that she was already thinking in terms of survival strategies for her new home struck her suddenly. When had she accepted that this was happening, that she was truly going to the Northern Territory with Valorian? Perhaps when he'd found her on the ridge, or perhaps when she'd driven a dagger into a man's throat to survive for this future that awaited her. Sarah and Elira settled into Helena's tent, which was sparse but comfortable with thick furs laid over the ground for sleeping. Exhaustion dragged at Elira's limbs, but sleep remained elusive. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the hunter's face as her blade found his throat, felt the hot splash of his blood on her hand. She slipped out of the tent, careful not to wake Sarah, who had fallen into exhausted slumber almost immediately. The night air was cold and clear, the stars brilliant overhead. Guards nodded to her, but didn't stop her as she made her way to the edge of camp, seeking solitude to clear her head. "You should be resting." Valorian's voice came from the shadows, startling her. She spotted him seated on a fallen log, a whetstone in his hand as he sharpened a blade. "I could say the same to you," she replied. "Kings sleep less than others. It's a requirement of the position." There was a dry humor in his tone that she hadn't heard before. He gestured to the space beside him. "Join me, if sleep eludes you." She hesitated, then sat, careful to maintain a proper distance between them. The rhythmic scrape of stone against metal filled the silence for several minutes. "The first kill is always the hardest," he said eventually, his eyes still on his work. "It changes you." Elira stared at her hands, clean now, but still feeling the phantom stickiness of blood. "Does it get easier?" "Yes, and that's the true horror of it." He set the whetstone aside, testing the blade's edge with his thumb. "When taking a life becomes easy, something of your own humanity is lost." "Is that what happened to you?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Too personal, too presumptuous. Instead of anger, his response held only weary truth. Many times over. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. This was a man who had fought and killed repeatedly, who carried the weight of many deaths on his conscience. Yet he worried about her humanity after a single kill. "I'm not sorry I did it," she said finally. "I would do it again. To survive. To protect Sarah or—" She stopped, unsure how to continue. "Or me?" he suggested, a hint of that dry humor returning. "You hardly need my protection." "Everyone needs protection sometimes," she countered. "Even kings. Especially kings." He sheathed his blade and turned to face her fully. The vulnerability in that statement, however slight, shifted something between them. This wasn't just the Alpha King speaking to an Omega he had claimed. This was a man revealing a small truth to a woman he was beginning to trust. "What happens when we reach the north?" she asked, needing to know what awaited them, what he expected of her. "You and your sister will be given time to settle in, to learn our ways." His gaze was steady on hers. "And then, when you're ready, we will discuss what comes next." "And if I'm never ready?" she challenged, needing to test the boundaries of this arrangement. He studied her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "You will be. Not because I command it, but because you are stronger than you know. The North will show you that strength, if you let it." The confidence in his voice was unsettling. How could he be so certain of her when she was still so uncertain of herself? Before she could respond, a rustling from the trees beyond the camp perimeter caught both their attentions. Valorian was on his feet instantly, sword drawn, positioning himself between her and the potential threat. A scout emerged from the darkness, dropping to one knee before the king. "My lord, riders approach from the east. They fly northern colors, but they're not from our party." Valorian's expression tightened, a silent calculation passing behind his eyes. "How many?" "A dozen, perhaps more," the scout replied. "They're moving fast." "Reinforcements?" Elira asked, rising to stand beside Valorian. He shook his head, sheathing his sword. "I sent no call for additional warriors." To the scout he added, "Wake the commanders, double the guards. No aggression unless I order it, but be prepared." The scout disappeared into the night, moving with the silent efficiency Elira was beginning to recognize as characteristic of northern wolves. Valorian turned to her, his face now a careful mask of control. "Return to your tent," he said, his voice brooking no argument. "Stay with your sister. If this turns dangerous, Helena knows where to take you." "Who are they?" Elira pressed, unwilling to be dismissed so easily. "If they're Northern, shouldn't they be allies?" A shadow crossed his features. "Not all who claim Northern blood share Northern loyalties." The cryptic answer only heightened her concern, but she recognized the command of an alpha when she heard one. With a nod, she turned to leave, but his hand caught her wrist, stopping her. "Elira." His voice had softened. The stern king replaced momentarily by the man. "I won't let harm come to you or your sister. That is my vow to you." The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "I believe you," she said simply, and realized with surprise that she did. He released her wrist, his fingers trailing briefly against her palm in a touch so light it might have been accidental. Yet the warmth lingered as she made her way back through the camp, now stirring with quiet activity as warriors prepared for potential conflict. Mira was awake when Elira entered the tent, her eyes wide with worry. "What's happening?" "Riders approaching. Northern, but not Valorian's men." Elira kept her voice calm, not wanting to frighten her sister further. "Probably nothing to worry about." "You're a terrible liar, Elira," Sarah said, but a small smile softened the accusation. "Always have been." Elira sat beside her on the furs, taking her hand in hers. "Whatever happens, we stay together. That's what matters." She nodded, squeezing Elira's hand. Outside, the sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder, then stopped. Voices carried on the night air, too distant to make out words, but the tension in them was unmistakable. General Helena entered the tent, her face impassive, but her body coiled with alertness. "Stay here," she instructed. "Armed guards are posted outside. You'll be safe." "Who are they?" Sarah asked, voicing the question Elira had failed to get answered. Helena's lips thinned. "The king's half-brother, Prince Magnus Blackclaw, and his followers. His presence here is unexpected." The careful neutrality of her tone told Elira more than her words. This half-brother wasn't a welcome ally. "Is the king in danger?" Elira found herself asking. Something flickered in Helena's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at her concern. "Valorian can handle Magnus," she said, which wasn't exactly an answer. "Stay here," she repeated, then left. Minutes passed like hours as the sisters waited, straining to hear any clue about what was happening outside. Finally, unable to bear the suspense any longer, Elira moved to the tent flap and peered out. The camp was arranged around a central fire, where Valorian now stood facing a man who shared enough of his features to make their relationship unmistakable. Both tall, both commanding. But where Valorian's power was contained, controlled, this man, Magnus, seemed to leak energy from every pore, his gestures expansive, his voice carrying easily across the camp. "Convenient that you happened to be in these mountains, brother, when such an attack occurred," Magnus was saying, his tone just shy of insolent. "Coincidence often appears convenient to those seeking conspiracy," Valorian replied, his voice level but cold. "Why are you here, Magnus? You were not summoned." Magnus spread his hands in a gesture of innocence that rang false even from a distance. "Can a brother not be concerned when he hears rumors of an ambush? I came to offer aid, of course. Your concern is noted. Your aid is unnecessary." The dismissal was clear, but Magnus seemed unperturbed. His gaze swept the camp, lingering on the wounded warriors, the alert guards, and then finding the tent where Elira watched, finding her. She should have stepped back, hidden herself from view, but something in his stare held her frozen. A smile spread across his face, calculating and cold despite its outward charm. "Ah," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "So the rumors are true. You've chosen a mate at last, brother, and a Southern Omega no less. How progressive of you." Valorian's expression didn't change, but the temperature of the air around him seemed to drop. "My choices are not your concern, Magnus." "But they are the concern of the Northern Council, are they not? Especially when they involve bringing an outsider into the royal line." Magnus stepped closer to Valorian, lowering his voice, though Elira could still hear his words. "They say she's disfigured, scarred. Is that true, brother? Have you chosen a broken mate for our bloodline?" Elira flinched as if struck, the familiar shame burning through her. Before she realized what she was doing, she had stepped fully outside the tent, standing straight and proud despite the humiliation coursing through her. "Yes," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent camp. "I am scarred. I wear the mark of survival, of a battle that killed my parents but failed to kill me." All eyes turned to her. Magnus surprised, Valorian unreadable, Helena's with a flash of what might have been approval. Magnus recovered quickly, a smile that didn't reach his eyes spreading across his face as he approached her. "The little Omega has spirit, I'll grant her that, but spirit alone doesn't make a queen worthy of the North." "She's not for you to judge," Valorian said, the words carrying a warning that made several warriors shift nervously. Magnus ignored him, circling Elira slowly, assessing. She forced herself to stand still under his scrutiny, to meet his gaze without flinching when he finally stopped before her. "Tell me, little wolf," he said softly, "what makes you think you're worthy of becoming our queen? What do you offer besides a pretty face? Well, half a pretty face, and the traditional Omega subservience." The insult was deliberate, designed to provoke either tears or anger. She gave him neither, drawing on a well of calm she hadn't known she possessed. "I offer nothing but myself," she said simply. "That seems to be enough for your brother, though I can't speak to his reasons." "His reasons?" Magnus laughed, the sound sharp and without humor. "My brother doesn't make decisions based on reason where Omegas are concerned. Ask his first love about that." "Oh, wait. You can't. She's dead." The camp went utterly still, the words hanging in the air like poison. Valorian's face had gone blank, a mask so perfect it could only conceal rage beneath. Elira didn't think. She moved forward, placing herself between the brothers, her back to Valorian as she faced Magnus. "You speak of honor and worthiness, yet you use someone's pain as a weapon," she said, her voice quiet but carrying. "What does that say about your character, Prince Magnus?" For a moment, genuine surprise flickered across his face, followed quickly by anger. "You dare lecture me, Omega? You who knows nothing of our ways, our history?" "I know cruelty when I hear it," she replied steadily, "and I know that true strength doesn't need to diminish others to prove itself." A hand settled on her shoulder, Valorian's, warm and steadying. "Enough, Magnus," he said, his voice deceptively soft. "You've delivered your message. Now leave before I forget we share blood." Magnus's eyes narrowed, darting between Elira and Valorian. Whatever he saw made him step back, though his smile remained sharp as a blade. "As you wish, brother. But the council will have questions. About the ambush. About her." His gaze flicked to Elira dismissively. "Don't think this matter is settled." "It never is with you," Valorian replied coolly. "Safe travels, brother." The dismissal was unmistakable. Magnus bowed with exaggerated formality, then turned and strode back to his men. Within minutes they had mounted and departed, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the night. Only when they were gone did Valorian's hand drop from Elira's shoulder. She turned to face him, expecting anger at her interference. Instead, his expression held something more complex, a mixture of respect, concern, and something deeper she couldn't name. "You shouldn't have confronted him," he said. But there was no heat in the rebuke. "Magnus is dangerous, especially to those He paused, seeming to reconsider his words. "To those under my protection." "He was cruel to you," she said simply, "about someone you lost." A shadow passed over his face, an old wound, but one that never fully heals. He studied her for a long moment. "Why did you defend me? You owe me no loyalty yet." The yet hung between them, full of implication. She considered her answer carefully, wanting to give him truth rather than what he might wish to hear. "Because I know what it is to have pain used against you," she said finally. "No one deserves that, not even an Alpha King." Something in his expression softened, the stern lines of his face gentling. "You continue to surprise me, Elira Moonshade." Before she could respond, Helena approached, breaking the moment between them. "We should move out, my king. Magnus's presence here was no coincidence. It would be wise to reach Northern Territory before he can arrange another welcome." Valorian nodded, instantly returning to his role as commander. "Break camp. We ride within the hour." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The camp was dismantled with practiced efficiency. Wounded warriors secured on horses, supplies repacked. Before dawn had even hinted at the eastern horizon, they were mounted and moving again, pushing north at a pace that spoke of urgency without panic. Elira rode with Valorian again, but this time the silence between them felt different. Charged with unspoken questions, with possibilities she was only beginning to understand. The silver wolf pendant lay warm against her skin, a reminder of home, of who she had been. But that girl, the one who had hidden her face, who had believed herself unworthy because of a scar, felt increasingly distant, like a story she had been told, rather than a life she had lived. As the first light of dawn crested the mountains ahead, Valorian spoke, his voice a low rumble against her back. "There, the northern border." Elira looked where he indicated, seeing a line of ancient stones set across their path, marked with symbols she didn't recognize. Beyond them, the landscape changed subtly, the trees taller, the underbrush thicker, the very air somehow different. "Once we cross," he said, "you'll be under northern law, northern protection." He paused, then added more softly, "Under my protection in truth, rather than just in word." "And Sarah? Your sister will be welcomed as your family, honored as your blood." She nodded, accepting this as they approached the stone markers. As Phantom stepped across the border, Elira felt a strange shiver pass through her, as if she had crossed more than just a territorial boundary. "Welcome to Shadowcrest, Elira," Valorian said, and she could hear the pride in his voice, the love he bore for his homeland evident in those simple words. Whatever awaited her beyond these ancient stones, whatever challenges, whatever secrets, whatever truths about her father's pendant and the prophecy that seemed to follow her, she would face them. Not hiding behind her hair, but with head held high. For the first time in her life, her scar didn't feel like a mark of shame. Perhaps, just perhaps, it truly was what Valorian claimed, a mark of survival, of strength, of a destiny she was only beginning to understand. The Northern Territory unfolded before them like a living painting, vast forests of ancient pines, their branches heavy with snow despite the season, mountains that seemed to pierce the very clouds, and valleys nestled between them like secrets waiting to be discovered. As they rode deeper into Valorian's realm, Elira felt the land itself watching her, assessing her worthiness. They had been traveling for hours since crossing the border stones. The pace had slowed to accommodate the increasingly difficult terrain, giving Elira time to absorb the dramatic landscape. The air here was different, crisper, carrying scents of pine and something else, something ancient and powerful that she couldn't name. "The trees are white," Sarah observed from her position riding beside Helena, "even though it's not winter in the south." "The frost blood curse," Helena explained, her voice matter-of-fact. "Winter never truly leaves Shadowcrest now, not for the past 100 years. Elira felt Valorian's body tense against her back at the mention of the curse. His arms tightened almost imperceptibly around her as he guided Phantom around a particularly treacherous stretch of path. "What is this curse?" Elira asked, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. "The attendant at the feast warned me not to ask about it." For a moment, she thought Valorian wouldn't answer. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the steady rhythm of hooves on stone. Then he sighed, the sound barely audible. "A century ago, Shadowcrest was different," he began, his deep voice rumbling against her back. "The forests were green year-round in the valleys. Crops flourished. Children were born in abundance." He guided Phantom around a bend in the trail, revealing a vista of the valley below. Even from this distance, Elira could see the unnatural stillness of the landscape, trees frozen in a permanent winter, lakes covered with ice that should have melted months ago. Then something changed, Valorian continued. The winters grew longer, harsher. The growing season shortened until it barely existed. Children came rarely, and when they did, many were too weak to survive their first year. What caused it? Elira pressed. The official history claims it was the wrath of the moon goddess, punishment for some forgotten transgression. His tone made it clear he didn't fully believe this explanation. Whatever the cause, the result is undeniable. Our kingdom slowly dies, our bloodlines thin, and I have spent 20 years seeking a way to end it. 20 years? She twisted slightly to glance at his face. How old were you when you became king? 25. The corner of his mouth lifted in a humorless smile. Young for the burden, but there was no choice. My father died of the same wasting illness that has claimed many of our strongest alphas. Elira did the calculation quickly. 45. Old for an unmated alpha, especially a king. In the Southern Territories, most alphas were paired by 30, producing heirs to continue their bloodlines. You've never married? Had children? The question escaped before she could consider its propriety. I married once, Valorian replied, his voice neutral, carefully stripped of emotion. Lady Alina of the Frost Pine Pack. She died in childbirth 10 years ago, the child with her. Elira's heart contracted at the raw pain beneath his controlled words. I'm sorry. As am I. He fell silent for several minutes before adding, There have been no more attempts. The council advised against it. The risk was deemed too great, both to any potential mate and to the stability of the kingdom, should I lose another heir. Until now, Elira said softly. His arms tightened fractionally around her. Until now. They crested a ridge, and Helena called a halt. The sun had begun its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. We'll make camp here, Valorian announced. The path ahead is too dangerous to navigate in fading light. The northern warriors dismounted, moving with practiced efficiency to establish a perimeter and prepare camp. Elira slid from Phantom's back with Valorian's assistance, her legs stiff from the long hours of riding. Sarah joined her, rubbing her lower back with a grimace. I never want to see another horse in my life, her sister complained good-naturedly. 2 more days, Helena informed them as she passed, carrying an armload of firewood. Then you can sleep in proper beds within Shadowcrest's walls. Bossy! As the camp took shape around them, Elira found herself drawn to the edge of the ridge, gazing out at the vast territory that stretched before them. Somewhere in that frozen landscape lay the answers to questions she hadn't even known to ask until a few days ago. Who was her father, really? How had he come to possess the pendant of a long-dead northern queen? And what did it all have to do with her scar and the prophecy that seemed to follow her? Your thoughts are loud enough to hear from across the camp, Valorian's voice came from behind her. Elira turned to find him watching her, his tall figure silhouetted against the campfires now blazing behind him. In the fading light, with his dark hair stirred by the mountain wind, he looked more like a figure from ancient legend than a mortal king. I was thinking about my father, she admitted, about who he really was. Valorian moved to stand beside her, his gaze following hers out across the wilderness. What did he tell you about himself? Very little. Elira's fingers found the silver wolf pendant, now a habitual gesture of comfort. He was a hunter, quiet, strong. He taught me and Sarah how to track, how to move silently through the forest. But of his past, his family, nothing. And your mother? Even less. She was gentle. She grew herbs and made remedies for the village. They were devoted to each other. Elira smiled at the memory. They would often speak in half-sentences, as if they could read each other's thoughts. How did they come to the Southern Territories? I don't know. They were there before I was born. The villagers said they arrived one winter night, seeking shelter. My mother was with child. Me. She frowned, realizing how little she actually knew. They never spoke of where they came from. Valorian was silent for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "May I see the pendant again?" Elira hesitated only briefly before pulling the silver chain over her head. The wolf pendant caught the last rays of sunlight, the sapphire eye seeming to glow with inner fire. She placed it in Valorian's outstretched palm. He studied it intently, turning it over to examine the back where intricate symbols were carved into the silver. His thumb traced the patterns, and to Elira's astonishment, the sapphire eye began to glow more intensely, pulsing like a tiny heartbeat. "What is it doing?" she whispered, mesmerized by the rhythmic light. "Responding to blood magic," Valorian replied quietly, "to the royal line of Shadowcrest." "I don't understand." "This pendant is more than ornament. It is a talisman created centuries ago by the first blood mage of our line. The stone at its heart is a moonstone from the sacred caves beneath Shadowcrest's castle, the place where our ancestors first made their pact with the moon goddess." He closed his hand around the pendant, and when he opened it again, the glow had subsided. "Only those of royal blood can awaken its power. It was meant to be worn by the king's mate, a symbol of her connection to the land and its magic." "But I'm not of royal blood," Elira protested. "I'm from the south." "Are you?" Valorian's pale eyes studied her face. "The pendant has responded to your touch as well. I've seen it glow against your skin, though perhaps you didn't notice." Before she could respond, a cry of alarm came from the camp. They both turned to see a warrior pointing to the sky, where dark storm clouds had gathered with unnatural speed. The air temperature dropped precipitously, and snow, impossible for the season, began to fall. "The curse strengthens," Valorian muttered, quickly returning the pendant to Elira. "Put this on. Keep it close." They hurried back to camp, where the warriors were securing tents against the sudden blizzard. Sarah rushed to Elira's side, her eyes wide with fear. "What's happening? It was clear just moments ago." "The Frostblood curse responds to the king's presence," Helena explained, appearing beside them with heavy furs. "It always worsens when he returns to Shadowcrest, as if the land itself rejects him." "Not the land," Valorian corrected, his voice grim. "Whatever power corrupted it." He turned to Helena. "Double the watch tonight. This storm may not be natural, and I will not be caught unprepared again." As the blizzard intensified, everyone retreated to the hastily erected tents. Elira and Sarah found themselves sharing one with Helena, the interior warmed by a small brazier that the general had somehow produced from her supplies. "Will we be able to continue tomorrow in this weather?" Sarah asked, huddling beneath the furs provided. "The storm will pass by morning," Helena replied with certainty. "They always do. A demonstration of power, nothing more." "Whose power?" Elira asked. Helena's sharp gaze assessed her for a moment before she answered. "That is the question the king has sought to answer for 20 years." Outside, the wind howled, snow pelting against the tent walls like tiny fists demanding entry. Despite the brazier's warmth, Elira felt a deep chill that seemed to emanate from within rather than without. The pendant lay heavy against her skin, warmer than it should be, as if fighting against the unnatural cold. Sleep came fitfully, her dreams filled with strange visions, a woman with Elira's features, but unmarked by any scar, running through a snow-covered forest, a silver wolf with sapphire eyes guiding her through a maze of ice, and always, at the edge of these dreams, a shadowy figure watching, waiting. She woke with a gasp, disoriented in the darkness of the tent. The brazier had burned low, casting only the faintest glow. Both Helena and Sarah slept soundly, their breathing deep and regular. Something had awakened her, but she couldn't identify what. Then she felt it, a pull, an urging from the pendant that now seemed to pulse against her skin. Without conscious decision, she found herself rising, wrapping a fur around her shoulders, and slipping out of the tent. The storm had abated, leaving the world transformed into a crystalline landscape of snow and ice. The camp was silent, except for the occasional stamp of horses and the soft footfalls of sentries making their rounds. Above, the clouds had parted to reveal a sky ablaze with stars, and most striking of all, a full moon that bathed everything in silver light. The pendant's pull led her away from the camp, toward a small copse of trees at the ridge's edge. She followed, driven by a compulsion she couldn't explain or resist. Her bare feet should have been painful in the snow, but she felt nothing but a strange warmth emanating from the ground itself. In the center of the copse stood Valorian, his back to her, head tilted toward the moon. He was shirtless despite the cold, and Alira's breath caught at the sight of the intricate patterns that covered his back. Not tattoos, she realized with shock, but scars. Hundreds of them, forming a map of spirals and ancient symbols that spread across his skin like a secret text. She must have made some sound, for he turned suddenly, his hand going to the sword at his side. When he saw her, he relaxed slightly, though surprise was evident in his expression. "Elira, you should be asleep." "The pendant," she explained, her hand rising to touch it. "It called me here." His gaze dropped to the silver wolf, which now glowed visibly even through the fabric of her nightdress. "Interesting. It seems to be awakening further. What are you doing out here? It's freezing." A faint smile touched his lips. "The cold doesn't affect me as it does others. A small benefit of being bound to a frozen kingdom." For the first time, she noticed that the snow around his bare feet had melted in a perfect circle, as if his very presence rejected the curse's manifestation. "You're back," she said, unable to stop herself. "The scars." His expression closed, becoming the impassive mask of the Alpha King once more. "An old tradition. Each king of Shadowcrest bears the history of his line upon his skin. Every victory, every defeat, every significant event, carved there so that he might never forget the weight of his responsibility." "They did that to you? Deliberately?" "It was done with my consent, upon my coronation." He turned slightly, allowing her to see that the pattern extended around his ribs to his chest, where an unfinished section waited above his heart. "The final chapter will be added upon my death by my successor." The matter-of-fact way he spoke of his own mortality sent a chill through Elira that had nothing to do with the snow surrounding them. "Why did the pendant bring me here?" she asked, changing the subject. Valorian studied her for a long moment before answering. "Perhaps because I was thinking of its original owner." "Your queen who died a century ago?" "Queen Selene." He spoke the name with a reverence that suggested this was more than historical respect. "She was not my queen, but my ancestors. She disappeared during the early days of the curse. Many believed she had been taken by whatever dark power brought the endless winter. And the pendant was hers. It was made for her, yes, but more importantly, she was the last known pacificadora in the Northern Territories." Pacificadora? The word felt strangely familiar on her tongue, though she was certain she had never heard it before. It translates roughly to peacemaker in the old tongue, but that doesn't capture its true meaning. Valorian's eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. A pacificadora is an omega with a rare gift, the ability to balance and harmonize the wild energy of alphas, to heal not just physical wounds, but spiritual ones. Something stirred in Alira's memory, the dying words of the hunter she had killed in the ravine. He had called her by that name, his eyes wide with shock. "The man in the ravine," she whispered. "The one I killed. He called me that before he died." Valorian's expression sharpened. "You didn't mention this." "I thought he was delirious from blood loss. It didn't seem important." "It is very important." Valorian stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the small clearing. "The gift of the pacificadora is hereditary, passed through bloodlines. They were revered in the ancient days, vital to maintaining balance in packs with powerful alphas, but they have become increasingly rare over centuries." The last confirmed pacificadora was Queen Selene herself. Understanding dawned like a cold sun rising over the frozen landscape. "You think I might be one of these pacificadoras because of the pendant?" "Not just the pendant. There have been signs since I first saw you." He reached out, his fingers hovering near her scar without touching it. This mark, it's not from an ordinary wolf attack." "What do you mean?" "The pattern, the depth, the way it healed. Those are the marks of an alpha's claws, a royal alpha whose claws carried the power of blood magic." His hand dropped back to his side. "And then there's what happened when you touched my wounded arm after the ambush. You felt it, didn't you? The energy that passed between us." Elira remembered the strange warmth that had flowed from her fingers into his injured arm, how the wound had closed more rapidly than should have been possible. "That was just... I don't know what that was," she admitted. "It was healing magic." "Pacificadora magic." Valorian's voice had dropped to a near whisper. "I have searched for someone with this gift for 20 years, combed through every pack, every territory allied with Shadowcrest. And now you appear, bearing Celine's pendant, with a scar that marks you as someone who survived an attack by royal blood." "This is madness," Elira protested, though a part of her resonated with his words in a way she couldn't explain. "I'm just an Omega from a small village. My parents were ordinary people." "Were they?" Valorian challenged. "Your father had the royal pendant. He taught you to hunt and track, skills few Southern Omegas possess. Your mother made remedies and medicines, perhaps using healing gifts similar to your own, and neither ever spoke of their past." Put like that, the coincidences seemed too many to dismiss. Yet accepting what Valorian suggested meant unraveling everything Elira had believed about herself. "What does this mean?" she asked finally. "If what you say is true, what does it change?"
"Everything." Valorian's eyes reflected the moonlight, turning them to molten silver. "If you are indeed a Pacificadora and of Celine's bloodline, you may hold the key to breaking the frost blood curse." Before she could respond, a twig snapped nearby. Valorian moved with blinding speed, placing himself between Elira and the potential threat, his sword drawn in a seamless motion. A moment later, Helena emerged from the shadows, her own weapon half drawn. "Forgive the interruption, my king," she said, her sharp eyes moving between them. "But we have a situation." "Speak." "A messenger has arrived from Shadowcrest. The council has called an emergency session. Lord Malachi has been vocal about your choice of Omega." Valorian's jaw tightened. "Of course he has." "There's more." Helena hesitated, then continued with obvious reluctance. "Prince Magnus has formally challenged your decision.
"He invokes the ancient right of verification." "He wouldn't dare." Valorian's voice had turned deadly quiet. "What is verification?" Elira asked, looking between them. "An obsolete tradition," Valorian replied, his disgust evident. "A way for the council to verify the suitability of a king's chosen mate through a series of tests and examinations. Invasive examinations," Helena clarified, her usual stoicism cracking to reveal sympathy, "designed to humiliate as much as evaluate. It hasn't been invoked in 5 generations," Valorian continued, "not since we evolved beyond such barbarism. Yet it remains in the ancient laws, never officially removed," Helena pointed out. "And Lord Malachi is a traditionalist. He will support Prince Magnus in this." Valorian sheathed his sword with controlled violence. "Return to your tent, Elira. We leave at first light. I want to reach Shadowcrest by nightfall tomorrow. Council be damned." "But the weather, the path," Helena began. "We will make it," Valorian cut her off. "I will not give Malachi more time to poison the council against us." Helena bowed slightly and retreated, leaving them alone once more in the moonlit copse. "Who is this Lord Malachi?" Elira asked. "The head of the Northern Council, the oldest, most traditional, and most dangerous of the 7 great families." Valorian's expression was grim. "He was passed over for the throne when my father died, despite being my father's cousin and technically in line. The council chose me instead, believing a direct descendant of the royal line would have a better chance of breaking the curse. He resents you, with every breath he takes." Valorian's smile was cold. "For 20 years he has watched and waited for me to fail, to prove the council wrong in their choice. And now I've given him ammunition." "No." Valorian's voice softened as he turned to her. "You've given him fear. If what I suspect about you is true, you represent everything Malachi has fought against: change, hope, a disruption to the power structure he's carefully cultivated during the curse years. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the unnatural heat radiating from his skin. I need to know if you're with me, Alira. Not as my chosen mate, not as an Omega bound by ceremony, but as an ally, because what awaits us in Shadowcrest will test us both in ways we cannot yet imagine. The gravity of his words settled over her like a physical weight. This wasn't just about her anymore, or even about Sarah. This was about an entire kingdom caught in a century-long curse, about power struggles and ancient magic she barely understood. I don't know if I'm this pacificadora you believe me to be, she said honestly. But I know I can't turn away now. Too many questions need answering. So yes, I'm with you. Relief flickered across his features, quickly masked. Then we should rest while we can. Tomorrow's journey will be arduous. He walked her back toward the camp, moving silently through the snow. At the edge of her tent, he paused. One more thing, he said, his voice so low she had to lean closer to hear. Trust no one when we reach Shadowcrest. Not the council, not the servants, not even the guards. Speak freely only to me, Helena, or your sister. You believe there are spies? I know there are. The ambush in the ravine was too well planned, the attackers too well informed of our route. His expression was somber in the moonlight. Someone in my inner circle betrayed us. Until I know who, we must assume walls have ears and shadows have eyes. With that ominous warning, he left her at her tent, disappearing into the darkness like a creature of the night. Alira slipped back inside, finding both Helena and Sarah still sleeping peacefully. She settled beneath her furs once more, but sleep remained elusive. Her mind raced with all she had learned: the pendant that responded to royal blood, the curse that had held Shadowcrest in its grip for a century, the scarred history carried on Valorian's very skin, the possibility that she, Alira Moonshade, might be descended from a northern queen and gifted with powers she never knew existed. And beneath it all, a growing sense that she had been led here, to this frozen kingdom, by forces set in motion long before her birth. Destiny or coincidence? She couldn't say. But as she fingered the silver wolf pendant, watching it glow softly in the darkness of the tent, she knew that whatever awaited her in Shadowcrest would forever change her life. Morning came too quickly, heralded by the bustle of the camp breaking down with military precision. As Valorian had predicted, the storm had passed, leaving behind a crystalline world of ice and snow that glittered in the dawn light. But the beauty was deceptive, masking the deadly cold that had claimed much of the Northern Territory's vitality. Alira emerged from the tent to find Valorian already mounted on Phantom, his expression set in determined lines. When their eyes met across the camp, a silent understanding passed between them. Whatever was to come, they would face it together. "Ready for another day of torture on horseback?" Sarah asked, appearing beside her with a forced cheerfulness that didn't quite mask her anxiety. "As ready as I'll ever be," Alira replied, squeezing her sister's hand reassuringly. "Stay close to General Helena today, no matter what happens." "You're scaring me," Sarah whispered. "Good. You should be a little scared." Alira's voice was gentle despite her words. "But remember what Father taught us. Fear keeps you alive, as long as you don't let it rule you." Soon they were underway, the procession moving at a faster pace than the previous days. Valorian pushed them hard, following paths that seemed barely passable, taking shortcuts through ravines and along ridgelines that made even the hardened northern warriors exchange nervous glances. "We're being watched," he murmured against Alira's ear, as they navigated a particularly treacherous mountain pass. 3 trackers, following since dawn. "More hunters?" she asked, resisting the urge to look behind them. "No. These wear Shadowcrest colors. Malachi's men, no doubt, sent to ensure we don't deviate from our expected route." "Why would he care which way we travel?" "Control." The word rumbled from deep in Valorian's chest. He must know and dictate every movement within his sphere of influence. It's how he maintains his power in a court rife with factions and rivalries. Throughout the day, the landscape grew increasingly dramatic. Towering mountains gave way to deep valleys where ancient forests stood like silent sentinels, their branches heavy with snow despite the season. Frozen lakes dotted the terrain, their surfaces reflecting the sky like polished mirrors. By mid-afternoon, they began to descend into the largest valley Elira had yet seen. And there, nestled against the far mountainside, rose Shadowcrest itself. The fortress city took her breath away. Unlike the scattered villages of the southern territories, this was a place built to endure centuries of harsh conditions. Massive stone walls rose directly from the living rock of the mountain, seamlessly blending natural and constructed defenses. Towers spiraled upward like the teeth of some great beast, their peaks crowned with blue flame that burned despite the daylight. At the heart of it all stood the castle itself, not the delicate, ornate structure Elira had imagined, but something more organic, as if the mountain had decided to reshape itself into habitable form. Dark stone veined with what appeared to be glowing silver created a mesmerizing pattern across the entire structure. "The veins are moonstone," Valorian explained, noting her awe. "The same material as the eye of your pendant. The entire castle was built around the sacred caves where our ancestors first communed with the moon goddess." "It's beautiful," Elira breathed, "even with the curse." "You should have seen it before." There was a wistfulness in his voice she hadn't heard before. The valley was green year-round, filled with farms and villages. Children played in the meadows. The moonstone veins glowed with enough power to light the entire city without a single torch. As they continued their descent, Elira noticed something strange. The closer they drew to Shadowcrest, the more the pendant against her skin warmed, until it felt almost uncomfortably hot. And stranger still, wherever their procession passed, she could swear the snow melted slightly, tiny shoots of green appearing momentarily before the frost reclaimed them. Valorian noticed it too. She felt his body tense against hers, heard his sharp intake of breath. "Do you see that?" he asked, his voice tight with controlled excitement. "The green? I thought I was imagining it." "You're not." His arm tightened around her waist. "The land responds to you, Elira. It recognizes the blood of a Pacificadora." Before she could respond, a horn sounded from the walls of Shadowcrest. 3 long blasts, followed by a single, shorter one. "The king's return," Helena explained, bringing her horse alongside Phantom. "They honor your arrival." But Valorian's expression had darkened. That final blast was shortened, a deliberate insult. "Malachi?" Elira guessed. "Who else?" His jaw was tight. "He controls the ceremonial guard. This is his way of signaling his disapproval before we even enter the gates." As they approached the massive city gates, Elira saw that a welcoming party had assembled. 7 figures in elaborate robes of different colors, each bearing a staff topped with a different symbol. Behind them stood a contingent of the royal guard, their armor polished to a mirror shine, faces impassive beneath their helms. "The Council of 7, Valorian murmured. "Representing the 7 great families of the North. The one in the center, in the black robe with silver trim, is Lord Malachi Frostborn." Elira studied the man as they drew closer. Tall and lean, with a face that might have been handsome once before time and ambition carved deep lines into it. His hair was silver, worn long and elaborately braided with small moonstone beads that clicked together when he moved. But it was his eyes that captured her attention. Pale, almost colorless, and utterly cold. They reminded her of the frozen lakes they had passed, beautiful but devoid of life. As their procession halted before the council, Valorian dismounted first, then turned to help Elira down from Phantom's back. She felt the weight of every gaze as her feet touched the ground, assessing, judging, searching for weakness. Valorian kept his hand at the small of her back as they approached the council, a gesture both protective and possessive that she found herself grateful for. Without it, she might have faltered under the collective scrutiny of these powerful strangers. "Welcome home, Your Majesty," Lord Malachi said, his voice smooth as polished ice. He bowed with perfect correctness, though not quite as deeply as protocol demanded. The council has eagerly awaited your return. No doubt, Valorian replied dryly, though perhaps not as eagerly as you've awaited meeting my chosen. Malachi's gaze shifted to Elira, and she fought the urge to shrink back from the naked calculation in those pale eyes. Indeed, the Omega who has captured our king's interest when so many others have failed. He stepped forward, circling Elira slowly, making no effort to hide his assessment. Though I confess, she is not what rumor suggested. And what did rumor suggest, Lord Malachi? Valorian's voice had taken on a dangerous edge. That she was hideously disfigured, a monster masquerading as a mate. Malachi completed his circuit, coming to stand before Elira once more. With shocking suddenness, he reached out and brushed her hair back, fully exposing her scar. But I see only a minor imperfection, hardly worth the dramatics my dear nephew Magnus described. Elira held herself perfectly still, refusing to show discomfort at the uninvited touch. Your nephew has a gift for exaggeration, it seems. A flicker of surprise crossed Malachi's features before his mask of cordial disdain returned. She speaks without permission. How refreshing. Lady Elira Moonshade is my chosen, Valorian said, emphasizing her title. She has no need of permission to speak her mind. Lady? One of the other council members stepped forward, a woman with iron-gray hair and sharp features. I was unaware the Omega possessed a title. She does now. Valorian's tone brooked no argument. By my decree. Malachi's lips thinned, the only outward sign of his displeasure. Of course, and we are all eager to become better acquainted with Lady Moonshade. The verification ceremony has been prepared for tomorrow at dawn. There will be no verification, Valorian stated flatly. That barbaric tradition was abandoned generations ago. Ancient laws cannot simply be ignored because they've fallen out of fashion, Malachi countered smoothly. The council has voted. The verification will proceed. Elira felt Valorian's body coil with tension beside her, sensed the anger radiating from him like heat from a flame. And if I refuse? He asked, each word precisely measured. Then the council must question whether our king still holds the best interests of Shadowcrest at heart. Malachi's smile never reached his eyes, particularly when he brings an unknown Omega into our court, one who bears a suspicious resemblance to certain historical figures. The implication hung in the air, clear as the icicles that adorned the gateway above them. This wasn't just about tradition or protocol. Malachi had recognized something in Elira, perhaps the same thing Valorian had seen, and whatever it was, it frightened him enough to risk direct confrontation with his king. Before Valorian could respond, Elira stepped forward, placing herself between the two men. The pendant against her skin pulsed with warmth, lending her courage she hadn't known she possessed. I will submit to the verification, she declared, her voice carrying clearly across the silent courtyard. I have nothing to hide from the council or the people of Shadowcrest. Elira! Valorian growled in warning. Trust me, she murmured, not taking her eyes from Malachi's face. Then louder. If ancient laws demand I prove my worth, then so be it. But know this, Lord Malachi, I will hold you to the same standards of honor and tradition you claim to revere. Something flashed in the old Alpha's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or a grudging respect. He inclined his head slightly. Well spoken, Lady Moonshade. The verification will begin at dawn. Until then, you and your sister will be given quarters in the Eastern Tower, separate from the king's, as tradition dictates before formal acceptance. With that, he turned and swept back through the gates, the rest of the council following in his wake. Only when they had disappeared from view did Valorian turn to Elira, his expression a storm of conflicting emotions. You shouldn't have agreed, he said, low enough that only she could hear. The verification is designed to break Omegas, to strip them of dignity and resolve. Then it will fail with me, she replied with more confidence than she felt. I've spent my life being judged for my scar. This will be no different. It will be entirely different. His hand caught hers, squeezing almost painfully. Promise me you'll forfeit if it becomes too much. There are other ways to secure your position here. The genuine concern in his voice touched her more deeply than she cared to admit. "I promise, but I won't fail, Valorian. Not when we've come this far." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded once, a decision made. "Then let's enter Shadowcrest properly, as king and chosen. Let Malachi see that his games will not shake us." As they passed through the massive gates, Elira felt a strange sensation, as if the very stones of the fortress were watching her, assessing her worthiness. The pendant against her skin grew warmer still, and she could have sworn she heard a distant whisper, like voices carried on the wind. "Welcome home, daughter of Selene," they seemed to say. "The time of awakening has come." Shadowcrest Castle was unlike anything Elira had ever imagined. From the outside, it had appeared formidable, even forbidding, a fortress carved from the living rock of the mountain. But inside, it revealed unexpected beauty. Soaring ceilings supported by columns that resembled ancient trees, floors inlaid with moonstone that glowed with soft blue light, windows of colored glass that transformed the pale northern sunlight into rainbows that danced across the walls. Yet despite its beauty, the castle felt cold. Not merely in temperature, though that was certainly true, with frost patterns decorating the corners of every window, but in spirit. The hallways echoed emptily. Few children ran through the corridors. Servants moved silently, their eyes downcast, their expressions guarded. "The Eastern Tower," Helena explained as she led Elira and Sarah through a maze of corridors. "Traditionally reserved for royal consorts before their formal acceptance. It sounds like a prison," Sarah whispered to Elira. Helena's sharp ears caught the comment. "Not a prison, Lady Sarah. A sanctuary. The Eastern Tower is one of the most defensible positions in the castle." "Why would a royal consort need defending?" Elira asked. Helena's expression remained carefully neutral. "History has taught us that those close to power are often targets, especially during transitions." They climbed a spiral staircase, the steps worn smooth by generations of feet. At the top, Helena unlocked an ornate door carved with crescent moons and led them into a circular chamber that took Elira's breath away. The room was spacious, dominated by a large canopied bed draped with furs and silks. A fire crackled in a hearth large enough for a man to stand in. But most spectacular were the windows, floor-to-ceiling panels of glass that formed nearly the entire outer wall, offering a panoramic view of the valley and mountains beyond. "These will be your quarters, Lady Elira," Helena said. "Your sister's room connects through that door." She indicated an archway to the right. "Your belongings have been brought up. Fresh clothing suitable for Shadowcrest has been provided in the wardrobes." Elira approached the windows, mesmerized by the vista before her. From this height, she could see the entirety of Shadowcrest spread below, the city with its concentric rings of buildings surrounding the castle at the center, the frozen lake beyond, and the dense forests that climbed the surrounding mountains. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "It was more beautiful once," Helena replied, coming to stand beside her. "Before the curse." From this vantage point, the effects of the Frostblood curse were starkly visible. The forest should have been green, the lake unfrozen in this season. Instead, eternal winter gripped the land, its cold fingers strangling the life from Shadowcrest inch by inch. "The verification begins at dawn," Helena continued, changing the subject. "I've been instructed to prepare you." Sarah moved closer to her sister, her expression worried. "What exactly is this verification?" Helena's face hardened. "A relic from darker days, a series of tests designed to assess an Omega's suitability as royal consort." "What kind of tests?" Elira asked. "Physical endurance, mental acuity, magical sensitivity." Helena's eyes flicked to the silver wolf pendant that still hung around Elira's neck. "And bloodline verification." "Bloodline?" Elira's hand rose to touch the pendant. "They'll test my blood?" "Among other things." Helena's expression softened slightly. "I won't lie to you, Lady Elira. The verification was designed to be grueling, even humiliating. Many candidates failed, by design. It was a way for the council to reject omegas they deemed unsuitable, regardless of the king's wishes. "Why would Valorian agree to this?" Sarah demanded. "He's the king." "Even kings must sometimes bend to ancient law," Helena replied, "especially when that law is wielded by someone as cunning as Lord Malachi." A knock at the door interrupted them. Helena opened it to reveal a young woman bearing a covered tray. She entered with downcast eyes, placing the tray on a small table before curtsying deeply. "Refreshments, my ladies," she murmured, "and a message from His Majesty." "Speak," Helena commanded. The servant girl kept her eyes fixed on the floor. "His Majesty regrets he cannot visit you before tomorrow's ceremony. The council has required his presence for discussions. He sends his assurance that all will be well and asks that Lady Elira keep what is hers close to her heart." With another curtsy, the girl backed toward the door. "Wait," Elira called. "What is your name?" The girl looked startled, her eyes briefly meeting Elira's before darting away again. "Lena, my lady." "Thank you for bringing the message, Lena." The servant girl appeared momentarily confused by the simple courtesy, then nodded once before slipping out the door. "Keep what is mine close to my heart," Elira repeated once they were alone. "He means the pendant." "Yes." Helena moved to the door, checking that it was properly closed. Then, lowering her voice, she continued, "The king suspects the rooms may be watched or listened to. Be careful what you say, even here." Sarah's eyes widened. "Are we in danger?" "Not immediate danger," Helena assured her, "but caution is warranted. Lord Malachi has eyes and ears throughout the castle." She moved to the hearth, adding another log to the fire. "I must return to my duties. Guards I trust personally will be stationed outside your door. Do not leave these rooms until I come for you at dawn." After Helena departed, Sarah immediately began exploring their new quarters, exclaiming over the luxurious appointments and strange northern artifacts. But Elira remained by the window, watching as darkness crept across the valley, the last rays of sunlight painting the snow-covered landscape in hues of gold and crimson. "What are you thinking?" Sarah asked, joining her after completing her inspection. "That we've stepped into something much larger than ourselves," Elira replied softly. "A power struggle that's been unfolding for a century." "The curse?" "The curse. The council. Valorian's rule." Elira's fingers traced the outline of her scar, a habitual gesture when she was troubled. "And somehow, I'm at the center of it. Because of this." She touched the pendant. "Do you believe what he said? About you being this pacificadora?" Elira considered the question. Did she believe? The rational part of her mind rejected such fantastical notions, yet she couldn't deny what she had experienced. The pendant's warmth against her skin, the energy that had passed between her and Valorian when she touched his wounded arm, the strange way the snow melted momentarily in her presence as they approached Shadowcrest. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "But something is happening, Sarah. Something I don't fully understand." "Whatever happens, we face it together," Sarah said firmly, taking her sister's hand, "like we always have." They ate the food that had been brought, unfamiliar northern dishes of smoked meat, hard bread, and preserved fruits, then prepared for bed, each lost in her own thoughts about what tomorrow might bring. As Elira lay beneath the heavy furs, watching moonlight paint silver patterns across the ceiling, she felt the pendant grow warm against her skin. On impulse, she held it up, watching as the sapphire eye caught the moonlight and seemed to glow from within. "What secrets do you hold?" she whispered to it. To her astonishment, the pendant pulsed once in response, a flare of blue light that briefly illuminated the entire room. Then, as if the action had drained its energy, the glow subsided to a faint shimmer. Sleep was long in coming that night, her dreams filled with fragmented visions, a woman with her face but without the scar, running through snowy woods, Valorian, younger, his back unmarked by the scars of kingship, and a shadowy figure watching from the edges, patient as the grave and twice as cold. Dawn arrived with a soft knock at the door. Elira, Already awake and dressed in the clothing provided, a simple gown of deep blue with silver embroidery at the hem and sleeves, opened it to find Helena waiting, her expression grave. "It is time," the general said without preamble. Sarah emerged from her room, still tying the laces of her own gown. "I'm coming too." Helena shook her head. "The verification is witnessed only by the council, the king, and essential attendants." "She's my sister," Elira protested, "and she will be safely escorted to the observation gallery, where she may watch without being directly present in the chamber." Helena's tone brooked no argument. "Those are the rules, Lady Elira." After a brief, fierce hug from Sarah, who whispered encouragement in her ear, Elira followed Helena down the spiral staircase and through a series of corridors that descended deep into the heart of the castle. The temperature dropped noticeably with each level they descended, until their breath fogged in the air before them. "The sacred caves," Helena explained as they passed through an archway carved directly from the living rock, the heart of Shadowcrest's power. The passage opened into a vast cavern that took Elira's breath away. The ceiling soared at least 50 feet above them, supported by natural columns of stone that had been carved to resemble ancient trees. The walls were veined with thick seams of moonstone that cast a blue-white glow throughout the space. At the center of the cavern stood a perfect circle of 7 stone thrones, each carved from a different material, one of black obsidian, one of white marble, one of green jade, and others she couldn't identify. 6 were occupied by members of the council, each wearing robes that matched their throne. The 7th throne, the obsidian one, remained empty. Opposite the circle of thrones stood Valorian, his face an impassive mask. He wore formal regalia she hadn't seen before, a tunic of midnight blue embroidered with silver patterns that matched the scars she had glimpsed on his back, a heavy cloak lined with wolf fur, and a simple crown of silver set with moonstones. Between Valorian and the council stood an altar of smooth stone, upon which rested several objects covered with a black cloth. Lord Malachi rose from his throne, the white marble one, and stepped forward. In the eerie blue light of the cavern, his pale eyes seemed to glow with an inner fire. "Lady Elira Moonshade," he intoned, his voice echoing in the vast space, "you come before the Council of 7 to undergo the sacred verification. Do you enter willingly, understanding that failure in any aspect will result in your rejection as royal consort?" "I do," Elira replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Malachi's lips curled in what might have been a smile. "Very good. The verification consists of 5 trials, each testing an aspect essential to one who would stand beside the King of Shadowcrest." He gestured to the altar. "The first is the trial of blood." With a flourish, he removed the black cloth, revealing a silver knife with a moonstone in its pommel, a shallow bowl of the same material, and 7 small crystal vials arranged in a semicircle. "Your blood will be tested against the 7 great bloodlines of the North," Malachi explained. "It will reveal your heritage and any unexpected lineage." Elira's eyes met Valorian's across the cavern. His face remained impassive, but a slight nod gave her courage. "Proceed," she said. Malachi took the knife and approached her. "Your hand, Lady Moonshade." She extended her right hand, palm up. With clinical precision, Malachi made a shallow cut across her palm. Blood welled immediately, startlingly red against her pale skin. He guided her hand over the bowl, allowing several drops to fall into it. What happened next made every person in the cavern gasp. As her blood touched the silver bowl, it didn't pool as expected. Instead, it began to glow with the same blue-white light as the moonstone veins in the walls. The light spread, racing along the moonstone seams like lightning, illuminating the entire cavern with sudden brilliance. "Impossible," Malachi breathed, his composure cracking for the first time. The glowing blood in the bowl began to move of its own accord, separating into 7 distinct droplets that rose into the air, hovering like tiny crimson stars. Slowly, inevitably, they drifted toward the crystal vials on the altar. 6 of the vials remained unchanged as the droplets approached, but the 7th, positioned before the empty obsidian throne, began to glow in response, as if recognizing a long-lost relative. A single drop of Elira's blood entered this vial, and the resulting reaction was spectacular. The vial erupted with blue-white fire that shot upward in a column, illuminating the carved symbol on the empty throne that Elira hadn't noticed before, a crescent moon cradling a wolf's head. "The blood of Moonwolf," one of the council members whispered, awe and fear mingling in her voice. "The royal bloodline." "A trick," Malachi snarled, his careful mask of civility crumbling completely. "A deception." "The blood ritual cannot be deceived, Lord Malachi," Valorian said, stepping forward. "As you well know, the lady has royal blood, specifically the blood of House Moonwolf, my house." Murmurs swept through the council members as they exchanged glances loaded with meaning. Elira stood frozen, trying to process what this meant. Royal blood? How was that possible? "The trial of blood is concluded," Valorian announced with quiet authority, "and passed beyond question." "The verification requires all 5 trials," Malachi insisted, regaining his composure with visible effort. "Blood is merely the beginning." "Then proceed," Valorian replied coldly. "But know that the first trial has already confirmed what I suspected. This Omega is no southern stranger to our bloodlines." Malachi's jaw tightened, but he nodded sharply. "The second trial, the trial of endurance." At his gesture, 2 guards approached, carrying a large crystal basin filled with water. They placed it on the altar, replacing the blood ritual implements. "Immerse your hands in the basin," Malachi instructed Elira, "and hold them there until I give permission to withdraw them." Elira stepped forward, peering into the basin. The water within was not water at all, but liquid moonstone, mercury-like in appearance, but glowing with that same blue-white light. "This substance will test your physical and spiritual endurance," Malachi explained. "Few can tolerate its touch for more than a few minutes. The pain is instructive." "Lord Malachi," Valorian began, a warning in his tone. "The ancient laws, my king," Malachi reminded him smoothly. "They must be followed precisely." Elira met the old Alpha's gaze directly. "I am ready." Without hesitation, she plunged both hands into the basin. Immediately, cold so intense it felt like burning enveloped her fingers, palms, wrists. The pain was exquisite, radiating up her arms and into her chest. Her breath caught, spots dancing before her eyes. "Most withdraw within the first minute," Malachi observed, watching her closely. "The weak-willed scream before that." Elira said nothing, focusing on her breathing, on remaining upright as wave after wave of pain washed through her. The liquid moonstone seemed alive, probing at her consciousness, searching for weakness. Images flashed before her mind's eye, her parents dying, her own face reflected in a mirror, the scar livid and fresh, Sarah crying in the night, calling for a mother who would never return, hunters pursuing them through the ravine, Valorian's face in moonlight, his expression softer than she had ever seen it. Somewhere in the distance, she heard voices raised in argument, but they seemed unimportant compared to the visions unfolding before her. The liquid moonstone was showing her not just her past, she realized, but possible futures. Shadowcrest in spring, the curse broken, children playing in meadows that had not seen green grass in a century. Herself standing beside Valorian, a silver circlet on her brow. And darkest of all, a battlefield strewn with bodies, Valorian's among them, while a shadowy figure wearing Malachi's face looked on in triumph. "Enough!" Valorian's voice cut through her visions like a blade. "She has endured longer than any candidate in recorded history. The trial is past." "I determine when the trial is complete," Malachi snapped. But even as they argued, something extraordinary happened. The liquid moonstone, which had been clear with its blue-white glow, began to change color where Elira's hands were submerged. Tendrils of silver spread outward from her fingers, transforming the substance until the entire basin shimmered with metallic light. "It's responding to her," one of the council members observed, leaning forward with keen interest. "I've never seen this reaction." Malachi stared at the transformed basin, his expression unreadable. "Withdraw your hands, Lady Moonshade." Elira did so, expecting pain as she pulled her hands free. Instead, the liquid clung to her skin like a second glove before slowly dripping back into the basin, leaving her hands not frozen or burned as she had feared, but marked with intricate silvery patterns that resembled the royal embroidery on Valorian's tunic. "The trial of endurance is past," Malachi acknowledged grudgingly, though these unusual reactions warrant further study. The pattern on Elira's hands faded gradually as the next trial was prepared. This one, the trial of mind, proved less physically taxing, but no less demanding. She was required to answer riddles in the old tongue of the North, a language she had never studied, yet found she could somehow understand. Words formed in her mind unbidden, answers coming to her lips as if someone else spoke through her. "Name the 7 sacred mountains of the North," Malachi demanded. "Frost Peak, Moonhaven, Wolf Song, Starfall, Shadowcrest, Silverblade, and Heartfire," she replied without hesitation, the names flowing from some deep well of knowledge she hadn't known she possessed. "Where does the royal line of Shadowcrest draw its power?" "From the pact made with the moon goddess in the time of first snow, when the Alpha who would become the first king saved her wolf form from hunters and was rewarded with the gift of blood magic." On and on it went, questions about history, lineage, traditions, and magic that no Southern Omega should have known. Yet Elira answered each one as if she had studied these subjects all her life. The 4th trial, the trial of sight, required her to look into a mirror of polished moonstone and describe what she saw. Instead of her own reflection, she saw visions of Shadowcrest through the ages, its founding, its glory days, the beginning of the curse, and most disturbing of all, the death of a beautiful woman whose face resembled her own, fleeing through a snow-covered forest with a small bundle clutched to her chest. "Celine," she whispered, the name coming to her unbidden. "The last Pacificadora." Malachi's head snapped up at this, his pale eyes narrowing. "What did you say?" "I see Queen Celine," Elira repeated more confidently. "The last of the Pacificadoras. She's running through the forest. Someone is chasing her." Her eyes widened as the vision became clearer. "She's not running to escape. She's running to protect something. Someone." Her gaze shifted to Valorian, understanding dawning. "A child. Her child." The cavern fell silent, the council members exchanging loaded glances. Valorian's expression remained carefully neutral, but his eyes burned with an emotion Elira couldn't name. "Enough of this charade," Malachi declared suddenly, his voice brittle with anger. "The final trial, the trial of power." He gestured sharply, and 2 guards approached bearing a large crystal, raw and uncut, the size of a man's head. They placed it on the altar before Elira. "This is a heartstone," Malachi explained, his composure recovered but a new edge to his voice. "The most potent form of moonstone, capable of storing and amplifying blood magic. Touch it, Lady Moonshade. Let us see if you possess any spark of the power you claim to represent." "I have claimed nothing," Elira reminded him calmly. "Your presence here is claim enough," he retorted. "Now, touch the stone." Elira looked to Valorian, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Drawing a deep breath, she placed both hands on the heartstone. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Power surged through her, not the cold burning of the moonstone liquid, but a warm, vital energy that raced along her veins like liquid sunlight. The pendant at her throat blazed with blue-white fire, its light joining with the glow now emanating from her hands, her eyes, even her scar. The heartstone responded, changing from clear crystal to a pulsing orb of light that lifted from the altar, hovering between her outstretched hands. It began to rotate, slowly at first, then faster, spinning out threads of light that wove around Elira in complex patterns. Through the haze of power, she saw the council members rising from their thrones, faces registering shock, fear, and in some cases, awe. Malachi alone remained seated, his expression a mask of cold calculation. "The stone recognizes her," someone whispered. Not just recognizes, another replied. It obeys her. Valorian stepped forward, his own hands raised as if to touch the light surrounding Elira. As he did, the patterns changed, the threads extending to encompass him as well, creating a shimmering web that connected them. Blood calls to blood, Valorian said, his voice resonating strangely in the charged atmosphere. Power calls to power, the king to his queen, Alpha to Pacificadora. Stop this, Malachi commanded, rising at last. This proves nothing but her ability to manipulate moonstone energy. Any Omega with the right training could achieve similar effects. Could they? Valorian challenged, gesturing to the cavern around them. Elira followed his gaze and gasped. The moonstone veins throughout the cavern were pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat, brightening with each surge of power through her body. More astonishing still, where before they had glowed with cold blue-white light, now they shimmered with warmer silver and gold tones, as if the stone itself were coming alive. The curse weakens in her presence, one of the female council members observed, wonder in her voice. Look! She pointed to a small pool of water in a natural depression at the edge of the cavern. Where it had been frozen solid before, now it rippled with liquid movement, ice retreating from its edges. Coincidence, Malachi snapped, but doubt had crept into his voice. There are no coincidences in magic, Lord Malachi, Valorian replied, as you well know. With gentle hands, he guided the heartstone back to the altar, helping Elira break contact with it. As she did, the overwhelming surge of power subsided, though a residual warmth remained, flowing through her veins like honey. The verification is complete, Valorian announced, his voice carrying the unmistakable weight of royal authority. All 5 trials passed beyond question or doubt. By the ancient laws you yourself invoked, Lord Malachi, the Council must now recognize Lady Elira Moonshade as my chosen consort and future queen of Shadowcrest. Malachi's face had gone very still, only a muscle twitching in his jaw betraying his rage. There is still the matter of her lineage. The trial of blood showed royal heritage, yes, but that raises more questions than it answers. If she carries Moonwolf blood, who are her true parents? And why was she raised in the Southern Territories? Valid questions, Valorian conceded, which we will address in due course, but they do not alter the outcome of the verification. For a long moment, Malachi and Valorian locked gazes in silent battle of wills. Then, with exquisite correctness, Malachi bowed. As you say, my king, the Council acknowledges Lady Moonshade's success in the verification trials. His eyes flicked to Elira, cold as the frozen lake above. But I caution against haste in the formal announcement. There are protocols to be observed, preparations to be made. Of course, Valorian agreed smoothly. We wouldn't want to neglect tradition, would we, Lord Malachi? The sarcasm was subtle, but unmistakable. With a final bow that managed to suggest both deference and defiance, Malachi swept from the cavern, the other council members following in his wake. Only when the last of them had departed did Valorian's rigid posture relax. He moved to Elira's side, taking her hands in his own. Are you all right? He asked, concern evident in his voice. The trials are designed to be grueling, even for those with training. I'm fine, she assured him, though in truth her head spun with the aftermath of the power surge. But I don't understand what happened. The visions, the knowledge that came to me, the way the Heartstone responded. I think you understand more than you admit, he said gently. The pendant, the blood reaction, your resistance to the moonstone liquid. All signs pointing to one conclusion. That I'm descended from the royal line. From your line. She shook her head in disbelief. How is that possible? My parents were from the south. Were they? Valorian's expression was grave. Or was that the story they told to protect you? Helena approached, having remained discreetly at the entrance during the trials. My king, Lady Sarah awaits in the observation gallery, and there has been a development. Prince Magnus has returned to the castle, demanding an audience. Valorian's jaw tightened. Of course he has. No doubt Malachi sent for him the moment the blood trial revealed Elira's heritage. What does this mean? Elira asked. Magnus, Malachi, they seem to fear what I represent. But what exactly is that? Hope, Valorian replied simply. For a century, Shadowcrest has lived under the frost blood curse. The royal line has weakened, children have become rare, the land itself has begun to die. Then you appear, bearing Celine's pendant, with royal blood in your veins and the power of a Pacificadora in your touch. You think I can break the curse? I think you already are. He gestured to the small pool, still unfrozen at the edges. That water has been solid ice for decades, impervious to fire, magic, everything we've tried. Yet it melts at your presence. He took her face between his hands, his touch gentle despite the calluses of a warrior. Whatever secrets your parents kept, whatever truth lies in your past, one thing is certain. You were meant to return to Shadowcrest, Alira. Not as a Southern Omega chosen for political alliance, but as blood of our blood, returning home. The conviction in his voice sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold of the cavern. Could it be true? Could she, scarred Alira, who had spent her life hiding her face, truly be descended from Shadowcrest royalty? Come, Valorian said, offering his arm. Oh. Let's collect your sister and return to the upper levels. There is much to discuss, and it seems Prince Magnus has decided to make things even more interesting. As they ascended from the sacred caves, Alira felt the pendant grow warm against her skin once more. But this time, the warmth felt like a welcome, like recognition. Whatever awaited her above, Magnus, Malachi, the truth about her parentage, she would face it with newfound confidence. For the first time since the attack that had scarred her, Alira felt truly alive, not merely surviving, but awakening to possibilities she had never dared imagine. If she was indeed descended from Shadowcrest royalty, if she did possess the power of a Pacificadora, then perhaps the visions she had seen in the Heartstone were not merely possibilities, but prophecies. Shadowcrest in spring, freed from its century of winter. Herself standing beside Valorian, not as a political consort, but as a true partner in power. These futures beckoned, tantalizing in their promise. But so too did the darker vision lurk in her mind. The battlefield strewn with bodies, Valorian fallen, Malachi triumphant. That future she would fight with every fiber of her being to prevent. As if sensing her thoughts, Valorian's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. "One step at a time, little wolf," he murmured. "First Magnus, then Malachi, then the curse." She nodded, drawing strength from his steady presence. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Alpha and Pacificadora, king and queen to be, the scarred Omega and the burdened king, each carrying wounds that perhaps, together, they might finally begin to heal. The council chamber in Shadowcrest's North Tower had been designed to intimidate. Circular in shape, with a high domed ceiling adorned with constellations rendered in glowing moonstone, it featured a massive round table carved from a single piece of ancient heartwood. The 7 thrones of the council members were arranged in a precise semicircle, with the king's obsidian seat positioned directly opposite, slightly elevated. It was a room built for power, for its display, its negotiation, and occasionally its transfer. Alira stood beside Valorian as they entered, Sarah and General Helena following close behind. The chamber was already occupied. Lord Malachi sat in his white marble throne, looking for all the world like an emperor despite the presence of the true king. The other council members were in their customary places, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. And between them, lounging against the table with calculated insolence, stood Prince Magnus. "Brother," he drawled, straightening as Valorian approached. "How kind of you to join us. And you've brought your verified Omega." His gaze slid to Alira, assessing her with new interest. "I hear the trials produced some fascinating results." "Prince Magnus," Valorian acknowledged, his voice cool. "I wasn't aware the council had summoned you for this session." "The prince's presence was deemed essential," Malachi interjected smoothly, "given the unusual nature of your chosen mate's heritage." Valorian moved to his throne, but remained standing. Elira positioned herself at his right hand, drawing strength from his solid presence. She had changed from the simple blue gown she'd worn for the verification into something more formal, a silver-gray dress with intricate blue embroidery that matched the patterns temporarily etched into her skin by the moonstone liquid. "Let's dispense with the pretense, shall we?" Valorian suggested. "You've called this session not to discuss Lady Elira's heritage, but to challenge it. To challenge me." Malachi's thin lips curved in what might have been a smile. "Challenge is such a confrontational term, my king. We seek only clarification. The blood trial revealed royal lineage, specifically Moonwolf blood. This raises questions that must be addressed." "Such as?" Valorian prompted. "Such as how a supposed Southern Omega carries the blood of Shadowcrest's royal house," Malachi replied. "Such as why her face bears a striking resemblance to Queen Selene, who disappeared a century ago. Such as why the pendant she wears, a royal artifact thought lost with Selene, responds to her touch as it would to a true royal." Magnus pushed away from the table, circling toward Elira with predatory grace. Most intriguing of all is her apparent pacificadora abilities. That particular gift has been absent from Shadowcrest for 100 years. Since Selene's disappearance, in fact. Elira met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. "You speak as if these facts are accusations, Prince Magnus, as if my existence itself is somehow offensive." "Not offensive," Magnus corrected. "Inconvenient. You see, there's a certain narrative that has shaped Shadowcrest's politics for a century. The narrative that the royal line is failing, that the Frostblood curse is unbreakable, that new leadership might be required." "Leadership such as yours?" Valorian suggested dryly. Magnus spread his hands in a gesture of false modesty. "I am of royal blood, albeit diluted, and I've never suffered defeat in combat or politics. The people respect strength." "The people respect legitimacy," Valorian countered. "Which brings us back to Lady Elira." He turned, addressing the entire council. "You all witnessed the blood trial. You saw how the royal vial responded to her blood. That cannot be falsified." "Indeed," agreed one of the council members, the woman with iron-gray hair who had questioned Elira's title. "The lady carries royal blood, but that only deepens the mystery. How is this possible?" "I believe I can answer that," came a new voice from the chamber entrance. All heads turned to see an elderly man standing in the doorway, leaning heavily on a staff carved with wolf figures. His white beard reached nearly to his waist, but his eyes were sharp as a hawk's, missing nothing. "Lord Alaric," Valorian acknowledged, surprise evident in his voice. "I thought you had retired to the mountain sanctuary." "I had," the old man replied, making his way slowly into the chamber, "until a messenger brought word of a Southern Omega with Selene's pendant and the blood of Moonwolf. That seemed worth the journey, even for these old bones." He stopped before Elira, studying her face with such intensity that she had to resist the urge to step back. "Yes," he murmured, almost to himself. "The eyes, the line of the jaw, even the way she holds herself. Selene lives in you, child." "Lord Alaric was royal historian during my grandfather's reign," Valorian explained to Elira. "He knew Queen Selene personally." "I did more than know her," Alaric corrected. "I helped her escape." A shocked silence fell over the chamber. Even Malachi appeared genuinely stunned, his usual mask of control slipping. "Explain yourself, old man," he demanded. Alaric turned toward the council, his frail appearance belied by the steel in his voice. "A century ago, when the Frostblood curse first manifested, chaos erupted in Shadowcrest. The king at that time, Valorian's great-grandfather, was already ill. The curse accelerated his decline." "This is known history," Malachi interrupted impatiently. "What is not known," Alaric continued undeterred, "is that Queen Selene was with child when the king died. She confided in me her fears, that the curse was not natural but deliberately inflicted, that the child she carried might be in danger from those who sought to claim the vacant throne." his rheumy eyes fixed on Malachi. She feared specifically the king's cousin, Lord Corvus Frostborn, your father, Malachi. Malachi's face had gone very still. These are serious accusations to level against the dead, historian. I speak only truth, Alaric replied. Selene fled Shadowcrest a week after the king's death. I helped arrange her escape, provided her with gold and contacts in the south. She took with her only the clothes on her back, her wedding pendant, and the unborn heir of Shadowcrest. He turned back to Elira. A daughter, as it turned out. A child who would have been Valorian's father's cousin. A princess of the Moonwolf bloodline. Elira felt as if the floor had dropped from beneath her feet. You're suggesting that my grandmother was Queen Selene? That my mother was the child she carried? I am not suggesting, Lady Moonshade. I am stating it as fact. Alaric's gaze was unwavering. Your mother, what was her name? Lyria, Elira replied softly. Lyria Moonshade. Lyria, Alaric repeated, a smile creasing his weathered face. The name Selene had chosen before she fled. She told me, if it's a girl, I shall name her Lyria, after the constellation that guards travelers in the night sky. He reached into the folds of his robe, withdrawing a small leather pouch. From it, he produced a locket of tarnished silver. Opening it, he revealed a miniature portrait of a woman with Elira's features, but without her scar. Queen Selene, he said, passing the locket to Valorian, who examined it closely before handing it to Elira. The resemblance was undeniable. The same golden hair, the same shape of eyes, the same determined set of the jaw. Looking at this woman was like seeing herself in a mirror, or more accurately, seeing what she might have been without the attack that had scarred her. This proves nothing, Malachi declared, though his voice lacked conviction. A resemblance, a convenient story from an old man whose memory may not be what it once was. The blood trial proves everything, Valorian cut him off, as does the pendant's response to Lady Elira, as do her Pacificadora abilities, which have been witnessed by this entire council. He stepped forward, addressing the council members directly. For a century, Shadowcrest has suffered under the Frostblood curse. For a century, we have sought answers, remedies, ways to break the curse's hold. And now, a descendant of Selene, the last known Pacificadora, returns to us, bearing the royal pendant and carrying the blood of Moonwolf. Coincidence, Malachi snapped. There are no coincidences in magic, Valorian replied, echoing his words from the verification chamber. Only patterns we have yet to recognize. He turned to Magnus, who had been watching the proceedings with calculating eyes. You said earlier that Lady Elira's presence was inconvenient for a certain narrative, the narrative that the royal line is failing, that new leadership might be required. What if that narrative itself is the lie? What if the curse persists precisely because the true bloodline was driven from Shadowcrest? Magnus's eyes narrowed. You tread dangerous ground, brother. I speak only truth, Valorian replied, deliberately echoing Alaric's words. A truth that has been hidden for too long. He turned back to the council. I propose a test, a public demonstration of Lady Elira's Pacificadora abilities. Let the people of Shadowcrest witness what I and this council have already seen, the power to heal, to balance, to begin undoing a century of suffering. Before Malachi could object, the female council member spoke up. I support this proposal. I witnessed with my own eyes how the sacred pool began to thaw in Lady Moonshade's presence. If she can affect the curse, even in such a small way, the people deserve to know, to hope again. Murmurs of agreement came from several other council members. Malachi's face darkened with barely suppressed rage. Hope can be dangerous, he cautioned, especially false hope. And what exactly do you fear, Lord Malachi? Elira asked, speaking up for the first time since Alaric's revelations. That my abilities will fail to affect the curse, or that they will succeed? The direct challenge hung in the air like frost crystals, delicate yet cutting. Malachi's pale eyes met hers, and in that moment, Elira saw something she hadn't expected. Fear. Not calculation, not ambition, but genuine fear. "The Frostblood curse has defined Shadowcrest for a century," he said finally. "It has shaped our politics, our society, our very understanding of who we are. To undo it without careful preparation could lead to chaos." "Or renewal," Valorian countered. "The choice before us is simple. Do we remain trapped in a winter of our own making, or do we dare to imagine spring?" The poetic phrasing seemed to resonate with the council members, who exchanged glances loaded with meaning. One by one, they nodded their agreement to Valorian's proposal. "The demonstration will take place tomorrow at noon," Valorian declared, "in the great plaza where all of Shadowcrest may witness." "And what exactly will this demonstration entail?" Malachi inquired, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Lady Elira will attempt to heal the heart tree," Valorian replied. A collective gasp went up from the council. Even Magnus looked shocked. "The heart tree has been dead for a century," one of the council members protested. "Nothing has revived it. Not magic, not science, nothing." "Precisely," Valorian agreed. "It was the first living thing to die when the curse began. If it can be revived, even partially, it would be undeniable proof of Lady Elira's Pacificadora abilities and her connection to Shadowcrest." "And if she fails?" Magnus asked, his tone deceptively casual. "Then I will acknowledge that my hopes were misplaced," Valorian replied evenly, "and we can discuss alternatives." The loaded silence that followed made it clear to everyone what those alternatives might entail, including, potentially, Valorian's abdication. "It is decided then," Malachi declared, rising from his throne. "Tomorrow at noon, the Southern Omega will attempt to revive the heart tree. May the moon goddess guide us all." With that, the council session was adjourned. As the members filed out, Malachi paused beside Magnus, whispering something that made the younger man's eyes widen briefly before he composed his features once more. When only Valorian, Elira, Sarah, Helena, and Alaric remained, the old historian sank heavily into the nearest chair. "You take a great risk, my king," he observed. "The heart tree has resisted all attempts at revival. Even at the height of your power, you could not awaken it." "I am not a Pacificadora," Valorian replied simply, "and I do not carry Celine's blood." He turned to Elira, who had been silent, trying to process the staggering revelations about her heritage. "I should have consulted you before proposing this challenge," he acknowledged. "It was presumptuous." "It was necessary," she countered, finding her voice. "Malachi would have found some way to discredit me, to dismiss the verification results. This forces him to either accept my abilities publicly or reveal his opposition for what it truly is, fear of change." Valorian's expression softened with something like pride. "You understand the game quickly, little wolf." "Is that what this is to you, a game?" Sarah asked suddenly, her usual deference giving way to protective anger. "My sister's life is at stake. All our lives are." "Sarah," Elira began, but Valorian raised a hand. "Your sister is right to question," he said. "No, Lady Sarah, I do not view this as a game. But politics in Shadowcrest has its own rules, its own rhythm, like a dance where a misstep can be fatal. I have been dancing this particular pattern for 20 years. And now you've thrust Elira into the center of it," Sarah observed. "I believe she was always meant to be at its center," Valorian replied. "From the moment of her birth, perhaps from the moment Celine fled Shadowcrest a century ago, carrying the future in her womb." Alaric nodded in agreement. "The pattern becomes clear in retrospect. Celine's escape, the child born in exile, the next generation returning to the north, only to die protecting their own children. And now the granddaughter returns, bearing the royal pendant and the gifts of her bloodline." Elira's hand went to the pendant, which had grown warm against her skin. "If what you say is true, if my grandmother was Queen Celine, my mother, her daughter, then why did they never tell me? Why raise me as a simple Southern Omega, ignorant of my heritage?" "Protection, most likely," Alaric replied. Celine knew there were those in Shadowcrest who would not hesitate to eliminate any threat to their power, including a child with royal blood. "She was right," Helena added grimly. "There were incidents, in the years after Celine's disappearance. Other pacificadoras found dead in suspicious circumstances, distant members of the royal line meeting with unfortunate accidents. Until none remained, Valorian finished. None except you, hidden away in the south, your heritage a secret even from yourself. The weight of this legacy settled over Elira like a mantle, heavy with responsibility, yet strangely fitting, as if she had been measured for it long ago. "The heart tree," she said, changing the subject. "What is it, and why is it so significant?" "It stands at the center of the Great Plaza," Valorian explained. "A white oak said to have sprouted from the spot where the first alpha of our line made his pact with the moon goddess. For centuries it flourished, growing to immense size. Its roots are said to reach all the way to the sacred caves beneath the castle. When the curse began," Alaric continued, "the heart tree was the first to show signs. Its leaves withered, its bark grayed. Within a month, it stood dead, a skeleton of its former self. Many believe that the tree's death was not merely a symptom of the curse, but its very embodiment. The theory," Helena added, "is that the curse was designed to attack Shadowcrest at its most fundamental level, its connection to the moon goddess, as symbolized by the heart tree. Break that connection, and the kingdom itself begins to wither." "And you believe I can reverse this?" Elira asked, doubt creeping into her voice for the first time. "Restore a tree that's been dead for a century?" "I believe you can begin the process," Valorian replied carefully. "Even a single green shoot, a single leaf, would be enough to prove your power and give the people hope." "And if I fail?" His eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. "Then we face what comes together." The simple statement, delivered without dramatics, reassured Elira more than elaborate promises might have. Valorian was not offering guarantees he couldn't keep. He was offering partnership in whatever lay ahead, success or failure. "We should prepare," Helena suggested. "If the demonstration is to take place at noon tomorrow, there is much to consider. Security primarily. Lord Malachi will not take this challenge lying down." "Agreed," Valorian nodded. "Double the royal guard, trusted men only, and I want you personally overseeing Lady Elira's protection." "What about me?" Sarah asked. "Where will I be during all this?" "By my side," Elira replied immediately. "Where you've always been." Valorian looked as if he might object on security grounds, but something in Elira's expression stopped him. Instead, he nodded. "As you wish. But General Helena will assign guards to Lady Sarah as well." As they left the council chamber, making plans for the next day's demonstration, Elira felt the pendant grow warmer still against her skin. Not uncomfortable, but insistent, as if it were trying to communicate something urgent. On impulse, she paused by one of the tall windows that lined the corridor, looking out over Shadowcrest. The frozen lake gleamed in the distance, the forest beyond it a study in whites and grays. But as she watched, a beam of sunlight broke through the perpetual cloud cover, striking the lake's surface. For just a moment, she thought she saw a patch of blue appear where the light touched. Actual water, not ice. "Did you see that?" she asked Valorian, who had stopped beside her. "Yes," he replied simply. "It begins." That night, as Elira prepared for bed in her chamber in the eastern tower, the pendant's warmth increased to the point where she had to remove it from around her neck, placing it on a small table beside her bed. In the moonlight streaming through the windows, the sapphire eye seemed to pulse with inner life. Sleep, when it came, brought dreams more vivid than any she had experienced before. She saw Shadowcrest as it had once been, verdant, alive, children playing in meadows dotted with wildflowers. She saw Celine, her grandmother, though the woman in the dream appeared younger than Elira herself, standing beneath the heart tree in its full glory, her hand resting on the swell of her pregnant belly. And she saw the moment the curse began, a ritual conducted in secret, deep in the sacred caves. A man she somehow knew was Corvus Frostborn, Malachi's father, slicing his palm with a silver dagger, letting his blood fall into a basin of liquid moonstone while he chanted words in a language that made Elira's skin crawl even in the dream. She woke with a gasp, heart pounding, to find the pendant glowing so brightly it illuminated the entire chamber. As she stared at it, trying to process what she had seen, a knock came at her door, urgent, demanding. Throwing a robe over her nightdress, she opened the door to find Helena, fully armed, her expression grim. "You must come with me," the general said without preamble. "Now." "What's happened?" "There's been an attempt on the king's life." Elira felt the blood drain from her face. "Valorian, is he—" "Alive," Helena assured her quickly. "The assassin was stopped, but there's more. Prince Magnus has been arrested." "Magnus? He tried to kill Valorian?" "No. The assassin was one of Lord Malachai's personal guards. But when questioned, he implicated Magnus as the one who hired him." Helena's expression was troubled. "The prince denies all knowledge, of course, claims he's being framed." "And Valorian? Where is he?" "In the sacred caves. He's called an emergency session of the council, and he's asked for you specifically." Helena held out a bundle of clothing. "Dress quickly. We don't have much time." As Elira changed into the formal attire Helena had brought, a gown of deep blue with silver embroidery that matched the royal colors, the general continued her explanation. "The assassination attempt has forced Valorian's hand. He's invoking royal privilege, an ancient right that allows the king to accuse a member of the nobility of treason and demand an immediate trial by the council." "Magnus?" Helena shook her head. "Lord Malachi." Elira paused in the act of fastening her dress. "On what grounds?" "The evidence gathered from the assassin, and something else. Something the king discovered after you left him earlier." Helena's expression was unreadable. "He said you would understand when you saw it." Once dressed, Elira went to wake Sarah, only to find her sister already awake and being guarded by two of Helena's most trusted warriors. "I'll be fine," Sarah assured her, though fear was evident in her eyes. "Go. Do what you need to do." The journey to the sacred caves passed in a blur of tension. Guards were everywhere, the castle in a state of high alert. When they reached the entrance to the caves, Elira was surprised to find not the formal council chamber they had used earlier, but a smaller, more ancient space deeper within the mountain. "The Chamber of Truth," Helena explained in hushed tones, "used only for the most serious matters of state, trials for treason, declarations of war, the crowning of kings." The chamber was circular, like most important spaces in Shadowcrest, but smaller and more intimate than the council chamber. At its center stood a pool of liquid moonstone, its surface perfectly still, reflecting the star-like points of light embedded in the ceiling above. Around the pool, the 7 council members stood in solemn silence, their faces illuminated by the blue-white glow. Valorian waited on the far side, his expression grave. Beside him, Magnus stood under guard, his handsome features twisted with fury, and opposite them both, also under guard, but with his dignity intact, stood Lord Malachi. "Lady Elira Moonshade," Valorian acknowledged as she entered, "descendant of Queen Selene, royal blood of the House of Moonwolf, Pacificadora. I have summoned you to witness justice." The formal address, delivered in the ceremonial tones of kingship, sent a shiver down Elira's spine. This was not the Valorian who had spoken to her of hope and partnership. This was the king of Shadowcrest, terrible in his wrath. "Lord Malachi Frostborn," Valorian continued, addressing the elder Alpha directly. "You stand accused of high treason against the crown and people of Shadowcrest, specifically the attempted assassination of your rightful king." Malachi's face remained impassive. "I deny all charges. The assassin was acting on his own, or perhaps at the behest of others seeking to frame me." His cold gaze flicked to Magnus, who snarled in response. "The assassin has already confessed," Valorian replied, "under circumstances that prevent falsehood." He gestured to the pool of liquid moonstone. "The waters of truth, drawn from the deepest part of the sacred caves. No lie can survive contact with them." "Confessions obtained under duress are notoriously unreliable," Malachi observed dryly, "even with magical assistance." "Perhaps," Valorian agreed, "which is why I have called for a direct examination, not of the assassin, but of you, Lord Malachi." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed the old Alpha's face. The waters of truth have not been used in such a manner for generations. The risk is one I am willing to take, Valorian interrupted. Unless, of course, you have something to hide. The challenge hung in the air between them, sharp as a blade. Malachi's eyes narrowed, calculating his options. "And what of Prince Magnus?" he inquired smoothly. "If I am to be subjected to this examination, surely the prince, who has been similarly accused, should share my fate." "The prince will have his turn," Valorian assured him. "But you, Lord Malachi, as the senior member of the council and the one with the most direct evidence against him, will go first." Malachi looked around the chamber, clearly hoping for support from his fellow council members, but their faces remained impassive, offering neither encouragement nor condemnation. The assassination attempt had shocked even those who might have sympathized with Malachi's political ambitions. "Very well," he said finally, his voice tight with controlled rage. "I submit to the waters of truth, but know this, Valorian Blackclaw, this precedent you set today may one day be used against you." "I welcome it," Valorian replied evenly. "A king with nothing to hide has nothing to fear from truth." At his signal, 2 guards escorted Malachi to the edge of the pool. The liquid moonstone seemed to respond to his proximity, its surface rippling slightly, though no wind disturbed it. "Lord Malachi Frostborn," Valorian intoned formally, "you will immerse your hands in the waters of truth and answer 3 questions. Falsehood will bring pain. Continued falsehood may bring permanent harm. Do you understand and consent to these terms?" "I understand and consent," Malachi replied, his voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. "Then proceed." With deliberate slowness, Malachi knelt at the pool's edge and extended his hands, palms down over the luminous liquid. For a moment he hesitated, and Elira thought she glimpsed a flash of genuine fear in his pale eyes. Then, with a visible effort of will, he plunged his hands into the moonstone. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The pool's glow intensified, sending ripples of light up Malachi's arms and across his face, illuminating every line, every shadow, as if stripping away the mask he habitually wore. "First question," Valorian said, his voice resonating in the hushed chamber. "Did you order the assassination attempt against your king?" Malachi's face contorted. Whether with pain or resistance was impossible to tell. "I did not directly order it," he managed through clenched teeth. The pool pulsed, the light turning slightly reddish. Malachi gasped, his composure cracking. "The waters detect partial truth," Valorian observed. "Clarify your answer, Lord Malachi." "I suggested to certain parties that Shadowcrest might benefit from a change in leadership," Malachi admitted, each word seeming to cost him physical effort. "I did not specifically order an assassination." The pool's light stabilized, returning to its normal blue-white glow. Truth, or at least enough of it to satisfy the waters. "Second question," Valorian continued. "Were you involved in the plot that created the Frostblood curse a century ago?" A collective gasp went up from the council members. This was not the question they had expected. Not an inquiry about recent events, but about the very foundation of Shadowcrest's century of suffering. Malachi's reaction was violent. He tried to withdraw his hands from the pool, but the liquid moonstone seemed to grip them, holding him fast. His face contorted in agony as he fought against both the magic and the truth it demanded. "Answer the question, Lord Malachi," Valorian commanded. "I was a child," Malachi gasped, "when the curse began." The pool flared bright red, the light so intense it cast Malachi's shadow against the far wall of the chamber, grotesquely elongated. He screamed, a sound of pure anguish that echoed from the stone walls. "The waters reject your answer," Valorian stated coldly. "Speak truth or suffer the consequences." "My father," Malachi groaned, his resistance crumbling. "My father cast the curse. After Selene fled with the unborn heir, he sought to ensure that the royal line would fail, that a Frostborn would claim the throne." The pool's angry red glow subsided slightly, acknowledging the partial truth. "And your role?" Valorian pressed. "I helped him," Malachi admitted, his voice barely audible. "I was 16, already initiated in blood magic. I provided the necessary sacrifice." Horror rippled through the chamber at this confession. Blood sacrifice had been forbidden in Shadowcrest for millennia, considered the darkest form of magic. "You've maintained the curse," Valorian stated, not a question, but a realization. "All these years." Malachi's head drooped in defeat, the last of his resistance gone. "Yes, 3 times each year, at the solstices and midwinter, I renew the working. It would have faded otherwise." "Final question," Valorian said, his voice now laden with controlled fury. "Did you arrange the attack that killed Elira Moonshade's parents 10 years ago?" Elira's breath caught. She hadn't expected this question, hadn't realized Valorian suspected a connection between her parents' death and the politics of Shadowcrest. Malachi lifted his head, his eyes meeting Elira's across the pool. In their pale depths, she saw not the cold calculation she had come to expect, but something more complex, a mixture of defiance, resignation, and what might almost have been regret. "Yes," he said simply, no longer fighting the compulsion of the waters. "I received reports of a woman in the Southern Territories who matched Celine's description, though much aged. I sent hunters to investigate. When they confirmed her identity and the existence of a granddaughter who showed signs of being a pacificadora, I ordered them to eliminate the entire family." The pool accepted this truth, its glow steady and unflickering. Malachi continued, the words now flowing freely, as if a dam had broken within him. "The hunters succeeded in killing the parents, but the children escaped. I assumed they would die in the wilderness or be absorbed into Southern society, their heritage forgotten." His gaze remained fixed on Elira. "I never expected you to return to Shadowcrest, bearing Celine's pendant and her power. When reports reached me of Valorian's interest in a scarred Southern Omega, I thought nothing of it, until I saw your face." Celine's face, marked but unmistakable. The chamber had gone deathly quiet, every person present absorbing the enormity of Malachi's confession. Not just attempted assassination, not just treason, but the century-long curse that had brought Shadowcrest to its knees, and the murder of Elira's parents, all stemming from one family's thwarted ambition. Valorian's face was a study in controlled rage. "Lord Malachi Frostborn, the waters of truth have exposed your crimes against crown and kingdom. By the power vested in me as King of Shadowcrest, I pronounce you guilty of high treason, blood magic, and murder. The penalty is death." Malachi's shoulders slumped, the fight gone out of him. The liquid moonstone released his hands, which he withdrew slowly, looking at the silvery residue that clung to his skin like a second glove. "Before sentence is carried out," Valorian continued, "you will provide complete details of the curse ritual, how it was cast, how you have maintained it, and how it may be broken." "It cannot be broken," Malachi replied, his voice hollow. "Not by any conventional means. My father designed it to be irreversible." "All magic can be undone," Valorian countered, "by the right person with the right power." His gaze shifted to Elira, and Malachi followed it, understanding dawning in his pale eyes. "The pacificadora," he murmured. "Of course, the perfect symmetry. What was broken by blood magic might be healed by its opposite." He laughed, a bitter sound entirely devoid of humor. "My father's greatest fear, realized at last." "Take him to the holding cells," Valorian ordered, "under heavy guard. His execution will take place after tomorrow's demonstration at the Heart Tree." As the guards led Malachi away, Valorian turned to Magnus, who had watched the proceedings with a mixture of shock and calculation. "As for you, Prince Magnus," he said, his voice marginally less severe, "the assassin named you as an intermediary, aware of the plot if not its architect. The waters of truth await your testimony as well." Magnus glanced at the still-glowing pool, then back to his half-brother. A series of emotions played across his handsome features: defiance, fear, resignation, and finally, a kind of desperate dignity. "I will spare us all the drama," he said, straightening his shoulders. "Yes, I knew of Malachi's plan. No, I did not actively participate in its execution. Yes, I would have benefited had it succeeded." His lips twisted in a sardonic smile. "Politics makes for strange bedfellows, brother." "Indeed," Valorian agreed coldly. "The waters will verify your limited culpability. But regardless of the outcome, you have demonstrated yourself unfit for position at court. You will be exiled from Shadowcrest, stripped of title and privilege." Magnus's face drained of color. "Exile? You cannot—" "I can and I will," Valorian cut him off. "Be grateful I do not demand your life along with Malachi's. Blood ties still count for something, even in the face of betrayal." As Magnus was led to the pool for his own interrogation, Valorian turned to Elira, his formal demeanor softening slightly. "I apologize for not warning you," he said quietly, "about the questions I intended to ask Malachi. I suspected the connection to your parents' deaths, but I needed his confession to confirm it." "I understand," she replied, surprised to find that she did. The revelation of Malachi's role in her parents' murder should have devastated her. Instead, it brought a strange sense of closure, a final piece slotting into place in the puzzle of her life. "Tomorrow," Valorian continued, "the demonstration at the Heart Tree becomes even more significant. With Malachi's confession, the people will know the truth about the curse, that it was deliberately inflicted, not a punishment from the moon goddess. That changes everything." "How so?" "A divine punishment might be seen as deserved, requiring atonement, but a curse born of one family's ambition? That can be fought against, resisted, broken." His eyes held hers with fierce intensity. "The people need to see that breaking is possible, that you are the key." "And if I fail?" she asked again, the same question she had posed earlier. This time his answer was different. "You won't fail, Elira Moonshade. Not because I command it, but because you are Celine's granddaughter, because you carry the blood of Moonwolf and the power of a Pacificadora, because you have already begun to change Shadowcrest, whether you realize it or not." He gestured around them, at the walls of the chamber where the moonstone veins glowed with unusual warmth and brightness. "The castle responds to your presence. The ice on the lake thins where your shadow falls. And the Heart Tree. What about it?" she prompted when he paused. A smile touched his lips, the first she had seen since the assassination attempt. "Go to your window when you return to your chamber. Look to the great plaza. The Heart Tree has already sensed your coming." Later, as dawn approached, Elira stood at her window in the eastern tower, gazing out at the great plaza where the Heart Tree stood, a massive skeletal oak that dominated the open space. As the first light of day touched its barren branches, she gasped. There, at the very top of the ancient tree, was a tiny splash of green, a single leaf unfurled during the night, catching the dawn light like an emerald against the gray cityscape. Spring was coming to Shadowcrest at last.